This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at Kevin Kautzman and at Brad Kelly. We got a doozy for you here on Art of Darkness, the podcast about the dark side of creativity. My name is Kevin Kautzman. I'm joined by the singular Brad Kelly. Brad, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
I am M-I-C-K-E-Y-M-O-U-S-E, Brad. I am Mickey Mouse. I want to get through this episode so I can cancel my Disney Plus subscription.
I don't think you're allowed to cancel Disney Plus.
2 weeks.
I don't think they let you.
Oh, that is enough. We're joined. This is an episode where we have a very special guest who's going to help us wander through the life of probably the single most impactful human in terms of American popular culture, Walt Disney. We're joined by internet sensation Blauer Geist. Blauer, how are you?
Hey, how you fellas doing this evening? I'm doing great.
Good. And just to give folks Art of Darkness listeners a little intro, Blauer Geist is the impresario behind the great literary journal Apocalypse Confidential. They just dropped their Halloween special. If you're listening to this in the future, there will be additional editions, I'm sure. He is 1/3 of the Elroy Boys, which is a great podcast to check out as well, and has the best GIF game on Twitter, I believe. So,
especially when I wake up from a nap, right?
Yeah, well, that's yes.
Yeah, Apocalypse Confidential, fun for the whole family. If your family is the Manson family, or maybe in this case, the Disney family.
Absolutely.
Right.
You're doing something special with that, man. You dropped the Halloween episode or edition just today, so I haven't gotten a chance to scroll through it yet, but I really appreciate what you're doing. So
thank you very much.
All right, right on. And we'll have links to Blauer's Twitter and everything in the show notes at Art of Dark Pod. And of course, we're at artofdarkpod.com. Let's kick off. Boys, it's already a little late here in October. It's coming up on Halloween. We are tackling one of the biggest subjects I think that we've yet attempted. We've hit some big air with Kubrick, Johnny Cash, some real household names, but nothing exceeds Walt Disney. So, Brad, to begin a classic Art of Darkness question, what do you know about Walt Disney?
The sun never sets on the Disney empire. I think, Walt Disney, what can you say? I mean, he's the name behind so much of culture, good or ill or stuff you hate. And, I tend to think that even most of us who have kind of come to resent the slimy tentacles have a soft spot for some Disney production somewhere in their heart. You can't grow up as a kid in America without being pretty familiar. Of course, Walt didn't come up with all of that or even most of it, but he's definitely was sort of the guy who kicked it off. But I know very little about him as a person.
Yeah, if you had to say anything about Walt as a person, what would you say? Do you know anything?
I think I remember two things about him as a person. One is that he was an anti-Semite, and the other was that he got fired for some advertising job or something because he didn't have creative ideas or something like that. It's one of I feel like it was one of those, those billboards that are like, courage, pass it on. And they have a picture of like Abraham Lincoln or something.
Yeah,
I
right.
feel like there's one of those where it's like, I don't know, imagination, pass it on. There's like a picture
Right.
of Walt Disney.
Yeah, for someone whose name is in your face from cradle to grave as an American, you know stunningly little about him unless
Right.
you really go out of your way, I would
Yeah.
say. Now, Blauer has done some research, and he's going to augment my more sort of normie tier path through the life of good old Walt. That said, Blauer, what do you come to this episode with in terms of the great man himself, Walt?
Walt Disney, the sorcerer king of the American century. Yeah, I mean, he's always been a fascinating figure, probably the most important and influential figure of the 20th century. Um, and like in a lot of ways, at this point, he's like practically a mythical figure because we don't really, and we'll get to it, like, and there's been like, hundreds of thousands, entire force of dead trees about this guy. And like, there's still so much about him that's like sort of cloaked in mystery. And I think he kind of liked it that way. But yeah, I mean, obviously I grew up watching Disney movies. One of my very earliest memories actually is seeing Lion King in theater. So that's like one of my first imprints. That's when the programming began.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, everybody's going to get their MK Ultra triggers are going to be.
Yeah, we will activate hundreds of sleeper agents with this episode.
I hope, and they all are going to subscribe to the Patreon.
Right.
That's what you're going to do.
We will go in and reprogram them to subscribe. Exactly.
Yeah.
When you wish upon a Patreon. And yeah, I've been to Disneyland. I've never been to Disney World, but been to Disneyland my fair share of times. And yeah, so always had this image of him as like the kindly uncle. And then, yeah, you hear these stories of him being an anti-Semite or Union buster, or just kind of general megalomaniac. And you kind of learn that, like everyone in life, their persona isn't their person, but like for someone who is so huge like Walt Disney, it's like even more shattering. Like it's like finding out that Walt Disney was like into and involved in all this stuff is like worse than your parents getting divorced.
Yeah, right. He stands in, the brand stands in for a certain kind of Americana, which we all know in our hearts is a lie, but which, because America is about the dream, we accept, and it's supposed to be this thing for us. And then, of course,
he's the ultimate dream reaver.
Right. Yeah, I want to begin the episode. Well, I think we're already well into it, but I want to quote someone who we've yet to do on Art of Darkness, Bukowski. I want to quote one of Bukowski's famous thoughts about Bukowski. This is someone else saying about Bukowski: what would Freud have thought of the 20th century? Freud could not have foreseen Mickey Mouse. Walt Disney making everything cute, everything nice. Bukowski was devoted to the de-Disneyfication of all of us. Someone has to kick the Mickey Mouse out of our heads. So perhaps that's something that we'll try to do on the episode. I am going to grudgingly confess that going back over this and getting Disney Plus, I have come to reappreciate the golden era Disney animation. It's staggeringly good. And we'll come to that. Part of my, I guess, ache over the Disney business is how a lot of this stuff is now lost. The Disney animation style is gone. And there's a tragedy.
It's too expensive.
Yeah, humans cost a lot of money to pay, to do the animation work. Well, go on, Blauer.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I mean, there's no denying that he was an absolute maestro. And I think that is a better word for him than artist, because I think, he rarely sort of put his pencil to paper, but he was this kind of master orchestrator of these figures, and obviously we'll get to later some of these people that he orchestrated, the actual animators, had their issues with him. But yeah, like it like getting into all the dark stuff about him isn't at all denying the fact that like what he did do was completely impressive.
Yes,
it still is impressive.
Yes, it is. And so, like every subject on Art of Darkness, it's a mixed bag, right? No, nothing is black and white. Well, so let's kick off, right? So, Walter Elias Disney was born on December 5th of 1901. So let's put ourselves there. He was born in Chicago in 1901. The fourth son of Elias Disney, who it was Canadian to Irish parents, and Flora. Flora was German and English. Aside from Walt, Elias and Flora's sons were Herbert, Raymond, and Roy. Roy would figure very prominently in Walt's life. They had a fifth child, a daughter, Ruth, in December of 1903. Now, I have two books that I'm drawing on here, and I'm going to be going back and forth between the books an awful lot. So if I sort of stumble a little bit, that's why. You just have to imagine me with a bunch of notes and things in the books. I've got a very, very simple, kind of basic, almost like a children's level Disney book.
I see that. Yeah, that's good.
By Don Nardo, and there he is. There's Disney, Theater of the Mind. He's in front of a camera, looking like avuncular. Right, that was he's like America's uncle, I think, is the image they sort of tried to, I don't think you ever saw him with a cigarette, but he smoked voraciously, and in fact, that's what killed him. And then I have the banger, the granddaddy of them all, this outstanding book from Neil Gabler, Walt Disney: The Triumph of the American Imagination. One of those biographies that is just does the job. And I think it's actually very funny. On the cover of this, it says, "As seen on public television." Okay.
Yes, that's what gets people running to the bookstore in droves.
Yeah. It actually does, Brad.
That's true. You're right. That's the reading public. So yeah,
indeed. Yeah. So I have hang on here. So I have something out of this book about his parents, but what ended up happening is that the family moved from Chicago to this little city, this little village called Marceline. And this would figure really prominently in Walt's psychology and his sort of myth making, because his earliest memories were of this little American small town. So you can sort of, if you know your Disneyana, you can sort of go, yes, this makes sense that this isn't a fellow who lived exclusively in the cities. He had that sort of idea of like a turn of the 20th century village in mind, and I think that comes through, when with the project, when it comes to the work itself, but also like Disneyland. But so this is about his folks. So, oh my gosh. They started having children very young. They're moving around the country right now, and they're Canadians. They got only as far as Kansas when Keppel changed plans and purchased just over 300 acres from the Union Pacific Railroad, which was trying to entice people at division points along the train route it was laying through the state. Since the Disneys were not American citizens, they could not acquire land under the Homestead Act. This is really important. You got a family of kind of flim-flam people. There's a little bit of like flim-flammery here, right? We're on the move. Right. The area in which the family settled, Ellis County in the northwest quadrant of Kansas, about halfway across the state, was frontier and rough. Indian massacres were fresh in memory, and the Disneys themselves waited out one Indian scare by stationing themselves all night at their windows with guns. Whoa. Crime, this was before Disney's time, but I'm just sort of like trying to get you into crime was rampant too. I thought this was funny. One visitor called the county seat Hayes the Sodom of the Plains. Yeah. So I think these were Disney's grandparents. So I think it's important for Disney to lay the time and place for this guy, and I'm trying to put ourselves in the shoes of these folks. because this is the guy who would end up like making the plans for Epcot Center and everything.
Right.
So you're going from roughly in this lifetime, you're going from Indian attacks. This is his parents, his grandparents, to Epcot Center, 19, you know what I mean? Just a complete wild span of time to think about.
Yeah, one thing that's always fascinated me is sort of the way that like men of the 19th century, and I guess it's not really right with Disney because he was born in 1901, but close enough. But like the way that men of the 19th century built the 20th century, and that like how our conceptions of those two things like are so different. So yeah, like you have, and even in 1901, like in Chicago, it's a big city, but like it's still for a lot of people like the farthest reach of like, you know, civilization in a kind of way. I mean, it's still dying off, but like you still have like the Old West even then.
Yeah, in 1901,
But yeah, and so the fact that this guy came from that environment to basically be involved in and like essentially not just imagining the future but building it is insane.
The urban rural divide it's characterized differently too. I mean, you got horse crap in the streets in 1901 in Chicago, right? It's a little, the boundaries are probably a little more vague in a certain sense. Yeah, it's an interesting point.
Well, so I have a little detour here around Marcelin, this city. So Walt idealized it. This is from the Gabler book. He later claimed he felt sorry for people who lived in cities all their lives and they don't have a little hometown. I do. His wife said that when he would take a train across the country and pass through Marcelin, he would even dragoon passengers in the middle of the night to point out where he grew up. Associates said that his recall of events and animals in the town was almost total. So we have this guy who, I think when you think about Disneyland and all the rest, he's trying to sort of recreate a vibe, isn't he?
Yeah.
With like the Main Street USA.
Yeah.
One of the windows in Main Street USA says like I think it's something like proprietor Elias Disney and established 1895. And I don't know, I neglected to like read why he chose 1895 or if there even is a reason, but it makes so much sense because that's like 6 years before he was born. So it's like it's nostalgia for something that's like a better time that's like just out of grasp.
Right.
Yeah, it's forever fading away, but we can move toward it in our dreams, right?
Right.
Until Zuckerberg, his heir, puts us inside the metaverse forever, right? This idea that's just a goofy idea, but anyway. So I want to talk about this other book from Dan Nardo. This is quite important because we're going to talk about the childhood. This episode, I think, is going to largely come in 3 parts. There's going to be very early Disney. There's going to be the career starting. Then there's going to be the late Disney. And I kind of want to talk about the childhood because, of course, what is Walt Disney if not an entertainer for children? I mean, it's still fundamentally at the core of what he was. Obviously, became a lot more than that. But he was pretty aware, too, that most of the visitors to Disneyland were adults. Like somebody's got to drag the kids. But this book says, it was Disney's fascination with animals that first got him interested in drawing. One day at the age of 6, he felt the urge to draw a picture of Porker, a huge sow he had tried unsuccessfully to ride on a number of occasions. Okay, we're having a normal one. But because his family was so poor, there was no drawing paper available. Then the boy noticed a bucket of fresh tar that his father had been using to repair the roof. Using the tar brush, young Disney sketched a drawing of Porker on the whitewashed side of the farmhouse. Before the sketch was finished, however, the boy's father discovered what he was doing. Elias Disney was enraged, not just because his son had defaced the house, but also because the elder Disney had little, if any, sense of humor and considered art and music useless and wasteful pastimes. He believed that a young boy's life should consist of nothing but hard work and studying, and sought to get this message across by taking his son into a nearby shed and beating him soundly.
Ah, yes. That's what you want to do with that first creative urge. Just tamp that bad boy. Just shove it back into where it came from. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. He really idealized the sort of pastoral world. And this is quoting him about these early drawings. He did not quit drawing. He quit drawing on the side of the house. Here's what he said. You can guess what I did with them, especially as I ate a lot of green apples in those days. Anyway, that's all those drawings were really good for. And that's where they went, down the can. Childish scribbles, that's all. The only interesting thing is I did them at all. I suppose I did them because just about everything around me at Marcelin excited me, even the chores with the birds. Feeding them every day, I got familiar with the shapes and the habits of ducks, chickens, and pigeons. I can't remember if I ever made a real pet of them, though I did learn their language, and I think they learned to understand me. What I mean is they'd come when I called them, even individually, when I summoned them by name. There was one pullet hen I called Martha, who used to come over when I shouted her name and lay an egg right in my hand.
Yeah,
and
this guy's a sorcerer summoning animals. There you go.
It's intense.
Yeah, for sure. Boy, fellas, there's a funny like Tempest-like quality of this, where at the end of the Tempest, Prospero sort of begs the audience to release him. I can't wait to be done with this episode. I'm excited to do it, but also like getting even adjacent to like Disney fandom and like Disney podcasts stuff makes me just want to run. Like it's just not a good thing, right? In any event, yeah, it'll be nice to not have to think about the Disney podcasts I listen to. It's sort of exactly what you would expect. Yeah. But his Aunt Margaret recognized his talent and did begin to encourage him. And I believe she got him art paper and a set of pencils, and he would do his chores on time and all the rest. So just a regular old turn of the century beating from your dad when you're 6 years old.
Well,
just normal beatings.
Yeah. Hey, you know, one thing, just noticing a pattern amongst many subjects, big shout out to like aunts and things that have taken so many of these artists.
Thinking about that. How it's always you go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, because we've hit like half of the people we've covered in the show, their dad's been like, I don't care about that art crap. And they've always had like their, you know, a stepmother or an aunt or a grandmother who like encouraged it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always like the adjacent authority figure who has the love of a family member but doesn't have the responsibility of a parent kind of thing. Where it's like, I need to straighten this kid out, where it's like with an aunt or grandma or uncle or whatever, they can just be like, oh, Walt can paint whatever he wants to.
Right.
Tweet whatever you want, Walt. Yeah. It's just the Bird website. Nobody will know. Tweet, Walt, that was a banger. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I think we probably all have that person in our lives. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the person who can hand the child back.
Right.
So I have a couple more interesting things from the childhood, and one of them involves Walt and an owl. Something happened when Walt was 7 years old with an owl, and here's what he said, remembering it 50 years later. Something happened to me when I was on the farm in Marcelin, Missouri, there that I've never forgot. There was a big owl in the tree. It was a Sunday. I'll never forget it. It was just dull. Folks were all doing something else. There was nothing for me, you know. I didn't have anybody to play with then. So the owl was up there. And he flew away, and I followed him, and he went over in the orchard, and he landed on a low limb in the orchard. Well, I don't know why, but I wanted to catch that owl. It was one of these big brown owls. So I snuck up behind the owl, and I grabbed this owl. Well, he immediately began to claw and fight, and I threw him on the ground. In my excitement, I stomped on him, and I killed the owl. That thing haunted me for a long time afterward. I could see that darn owl in my dreams, you know, but I was just so excited. I didn't want him. I didn't want to kill him. But when he began to claw and everything else, I got so excited. I threw him on the ground and stomped on him, and I killed him. I didn't want to kill him. I didn't have it in my mind at all. And I don't know yet why I wanted to have that owl. It was just, I could catch him, He was on a low limb there.
Oof. So yeah, he is actually wrestling with demonic forces now.
Yeah,
like
that's a whole freaking parables. Yeah, because I mean, you have like, what is the symbolism of an owl? Like wisdom, or what is? I forgot.
It's deep. I mean, it goes a couple different directions. Yeah. So wisdom is certainly one of them, but like, there in some traditions they're like envoys of God in some way. There's a lot of people who've had UFO encounters, who've had owl encounters just before or after them. Like they're yeah, right.
The owls are not what they seem.
Yeah, so you're in, when you're in owl territory, you're on the other side of the threshold or something. And I think when you kill it, that's dark.
It's like the fact that he wanted, yeah, man, that is like if you wrote that as a story and submitted it to your writing instructor, they'd be like, this is too on the nose.
Yeah.
Because it's like he wanted to possess the owl, and like it wanted it for its like sort of like cute, cuddly, cartoonish qualities, which you'd see later in one of their early animated shorts, This Old Barn. Owl's featured prominently in that. He wanted to possess the owl and keep it as a possession. But then once the owl revealed its nature, and that no, nature is red in tooth and claw, he rejected that and bashed it to death.
Yeah. Wow. That's like a villain origin story.
Yeah.
It really is. Dang. Okay.
Well, so Walt in his childhood, maybe I'll leaven it first. I'm going to talk about his brother Roy, and then we'll come back to the next one. But they were very, very close. And you have to sort of think about this time period where Chaplin was like Elvis in terms of popularity, right? And he entered at one point, he entered a Charlie Chaplin lookalike contest. He was, he knew his father wouldn't let him do it. So he planned to dress up and sneak out his bedroom window. And this is from a biographer, Bob Thomas. Walt rummaged through his father's closet and found a shiny old suit that was inches too long for him. It was perfect. Its baggy pants and oversized jacket provided just the right complement to his father's work shoes, which were also several times too large. Stumbling in the massive shoes, he hurried downstairs to the kitchen and rubbed his finger against the back of his mother's stove. Then he applied the soot to his upper lip. It made a good imitation of the Chaplin mustache. Walt went upstairs to his mother's bedroom and stood before the full-length mirror. For an hour, he carefully rehearsed the Chaplin waddle, the way he twirled his cane, and finally the shy smile. He appeared backstage at the Rialto Theater along with a dozen other Chaplin imitators. They were all shapes and sizes, fat boys, skinny boys. There were even a few girls mixed in. Our next contestant is Walter Disney. Walt heard the announcement, took a deep breath, and duck walked onto the stage. He tried his first gag. He dropped his derby, and as he stopped to pick it up, permitted his own foot to kick it away. A ripple of laughter ran through the darkened theater. He tried his other gags, and they too brought roars of approval. The audience unanimously acclaimed Walt the winner. He was elated. This is when he was 14.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think when you think about that early Disney business, right, it's gags. It's just one gag after the next, right? When we get to Steamboat Willie and all of it, it's just one visual pun or gag. And so that's the tradition that Disney was coming out of. Yeah. Well, so we're right getting, right around World War I-ish time. But I do want to pause and talk about Walt having another premonition. So this is related to the owl. This comes from So this is the sort of childish book, you know. It's like, contrary to popular opinion, Walt Disney was not always a happy and upbeat person. You don't say, right? So this is a film critic and biographer, Richard Schickel, talking about Disney's depression. He also acquired at about this time an obsession with death, which was so marked that even his daughter, this is much later for Disney, but I think it's important. I think it pairs with the owl. Even his daughter commented upon it in her study of her father. She claims it began at a party where a fortune teller predicted he would not live beyond his 35th birthday, a prediction that plagued him even after he sailed past that date in excellent health. He felt that he had, at best, been granted only a reprieve. For the rest of his life, he avoided funerals, and when forced to attend them, fell into long, brooding depressions. He even avoided would-be biographers, commenting to more than one acquaintance that biographies are only written about dead people. He apparently feared that not only would such studies pry into business and personal secrets, but they might have the effect of reversing the usual order of things and somehow cause his demise. While he lived, no book about him or his studio appeared unless he approved the contents, which meant that they all heavily stressed neutral technological matters and said little about the master except to praise his creative genius. So yeah, they're laying in a few themes here that we're gonna begin to
interesting
play around with.
And that obsession with death is sort of resonant with just the whole medium or genre of animation itself. Because I mean, obviously with live action, if you're, filmed, you live forever. But like, especially with animation, it is perennial and eternal and ageless. And so by putting pencil to paper, you're basically able to cheat death in that way.
Yeah. And even narratively, I feel like we allow death and rebirth a little. Like, death is a more flexible concept and stuff that's animated. I mean, you see that certainly in like comic books, but like the whole Itchy and Scratchy thing, right? Like that's a exaggeration of it, but like the whole point is Itchy basically kills Scratchy completely in every episode.
Yeah, mortality is more elastic.
It definitely seems that way.
And I mean, with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, she goes into a long sleep, basically death, and is only able to be awakened by Prince Charming. And so they're right there.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, one of the early cartoons too is just the dancing skeletons having a party.
That's right.
Yeah, it's all there when you look at it. When we get to Fantasia, it's really spooky. The final passage of Fantasia is, souls rise from the dead on Walpurgisnacht, and dance in the hand of Satan. This is what happens at the end of that film.
If you just described it, it would sound like a heavy metal music video.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, that's all right. I want to anchor us. Well, actually, before I go forward, there's a rumor apparently, Blauer, that Disney is not in fact the child of his father. Is this something you want to talk about?
Ooh.
Oh yeah, there was, and I think it's long debunked by now, but I still find it interesting. And the fact that this rumor persisted for so long, I feel like is telling about the general Disney mythos, is that he was not born in Chicago of a Canadian father, flim flam family, but he was the son. He was born in some picturesque village in Spain, and that he was El Caudillo Disney, and that he was the son of, not only that, but he was the son of a nobleman and like a washwoman. And that like the washwoman, and I guess there's some corroboration because like the washwoman moved to Chicago and I guess remarried, and like husband was like, the new husband in America was a circus acrobat who actually lived around where the Disneys were in Chicago. And so I think that's where people latch onto that. And so basically the theory is, yeah, that he was the illegitimate child of a nobleman and a lowborn. And then the lowborn put him up for adoption. And that's when he got into the hands of the Disneys. And that just goes perfectly in with like the whole mythology of like, you know, born of nobility.
Yeah.
And then married, and then not married, but like, and then taken in by these sort of lowly people who, even though it's a rough childhood, made him the man he was. And then he becomes this titan of industry. And so it has a fairy tale quality. And so it's a kind of like weird meta conspiracy theory, because you think it's like, it's almost the kind of thing that Disney would want to perpetuate about himself. But, and he kind of does it by like, not perpetuating about it. Anyway, I found it very interesting.
That is interesting.
I think that's a very interesting little interlude. Yeah. Well, I want to anchor us in time again here. So we were in Missouri, then we're in this chaplain business. I'm sure happened in Kansas City. So we've left Marceline. We're in Kansas City. Walt had a lifelong obsession with trains as well. He loved trains, and I think this is evident at the resorts and all the rest, right? Monorail. He loved it. So in 1911, they moved to Kansas City, Missouri. He attended Benton Grammar School. He met a fellow student named Walter Pfeiffer. He came from a family of theater fans. There was this other Walt who introduced him to vaudeville and motion pictures. Walt started spending a lot of time over there. His father, Elias, had purchased a newspaper route for the Kansas City Star and the Kansas City Times. Disney, so Walt and Roy would wake up at 4:30 every morning and deliver the Times before school, and then would do the rounds for the Evening Star after school. It was exhausting. I think I read that he actually picked up a route on the sly, like around his father, to make his own money. Right?
Nice.
So, okay, we got a little shifty flim-flammery, right?
Yeah.
He did the route for more than 6 years. Now that is a lost world. Brad, Blauer, did either of you deliver papers?
No, I didn't.
You dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
Blauer, were you a paper boy? You ever deliver papers?
I was not. I was on the youth board for my local newspaper. And it might have almost been as bad.
Oh, that's too white. That's too white collar. I was out there. I learned to listen to Metallica delivering papers in the cold, uphill both ways in North Dakota in the 90s. I'm like the last of the Mohicans, man.
Yeah, for real.
I did it. I had a friend who his family were very impoverished. They were poor, lived in a trailer park on the wrong side of the wrong city in the wrong state at the wrong time. The whole family did multiple paper routes to make money.
Wow.
So this is not, this is 100 years, or that would have been 80 years earlier, but this was a thing. That's gone for sure. Well, so in any case, it's not about me, but I think it's interesting, right? You got to imagine doing these paper routes. Well, so Elias buys stock in 1917 in a Chicago jelly producer, the Ozell Company, and moved back to the city with his family. So now we've got Disney doing this whole round trip from this pastoral small town, Marceline, a little bit bigger Kansas City. Now we're back in the big city. He enrolls in high school. He becomes the cartoonist of the school newspaper. He's drawing patriotic pictures about World War I. He's taking night courses at the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts. I want to have an interlude here briefly where I talk about his relationship with his brother, which was very important to him. Roy would go on to be his right-hand man and his money man, his accountant. So this is from the Gabler book, saying that Flora was the peacemaker in the family. It sounds like his father had a temper, right? Roy was its protector, or at least Walt's protector. Walt was never close to either Herbert or Ray, who had left years earlier, though they both lived in Kansas City, and he referred to them as strangers to me all my life, which is quite sad. Indeed, Herbert had married a local girl and had a daughter of his own. Roy seemingly had no more in common with Walt than the older brothers did, other than the fact that he still lived at home. He was 8 years Walt's senior and hardly a comrade in arms, nor did he share Walt's temperament. Though nowhere near as doleful as his father, whom he closely resembled physically, he was not an enthusiast or prankster or extrovert like Walt either, and he had little of Walt's appeal. But Roy and Walt formed a very close relationship, so close that Walt seemed to regard him less as a brother than as a surrogate father, confiding in him as he could never have confided in Elias. They might argue, but when night fell, they would crawl into bed together and trade stories. So that's quite dear, I think, and that's probably something that allowed him to eventually to sort of do some of the things that he did.
Yeah, and I think there's an anecdote where someone outraged asked Roy Disney, "Who do you think you are, God?" And then Roy said, "No, I'm God's brother."
Nice.
Yeah. Roy Disney would be an interesting subject all his own. I'm sure. You know, these men changed the world. I mean, what did Blauer today on Twitter? I posted a picture. I was at Target boutique, Target, shopping for some things, and there it is, Minnie and Mickey Mouse in this $150 Lego set, and I'm just like, it's the mouse's world. They just let us live in it, right?
Yeah.
So, let me see here. So now we're in Chicago, and we're sort of getting out of the early life section here. Although there's an important story, because he does spend time in World War I. He forges the date of his birth on his birth certificate, and he joined the Red Cross in September of 19 and became an ambulance driver, underage. They sent him to France, but he arrived late for the war. So
just missed it.
Yep. He drew cartoons on the side of his ambulance for decoration, and had some of his work was published in the Army newspaper. So a little bit of a stint, but I think it's interesting that he would go so far as to forge his own document, lie about his age in order to get into the war. Is very interesting, and I think it's worth noting because the Disney studio would have a huge effect on World War II. They would become the major propaganda wing of the American government, and actually probably a permanent part of the American state, as far as I'm concerned. Blauer, I think you might have a few things to say about that when we get to it.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay. Well, so now let's get into the career stuff. All right. So, Brad, where are you with Walt right now? Like, what's your vibe?
Like most of these guys, we cover, I'm cheering for him right now. You know, there's something charming about being a cartoonist and drawing cartoons on the side of your ambulance and whatnot. I'd be interested to see some of that early stuff. I doubt very much of it has survived, but I so far so good. The whole killing the owl thing, I'm like, I'm worried about his soul, to be honest.
Yeah.
So beyond that, I'm sort of like, there's got to be clouds looming, because that's shouldn't do that, I would say.
Well, so he has a partnership. We're talking about some very, very early business. He's with fellow animators. He has some partnerships. It's May of 21. Now we're getting into the swinging 20s. They created something called Laugh-O-Grams, and these were modernized fairy tales. And I think they were used for advertising. So he's in business with some other people. He's doing these little things that would play in front of little movies, right? Mm-hmm. The company, wasn't staying solvent. So then this is important. He started production of Alice in Wonderland, based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which combined live action with animation. And if you can rack your brain and think back to all the sort of early and middle Disney, there are all these moments where it's clear he really wants to combine animation with live action. Maybe the most famous moment being when Mickey pops into the screen of Fantasia and interacts with the conductor. Can you recall that? It's a very famous moment.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's this is something I think it's really important to stop and mention, that his interest in merging the world of the cartoon, of the animated cartoon, with the real world.
Right, drawing that idealized world into our world, right?
Yes.
Which makes it make sense that the build an amusement park is like another obvious means of trying to do that. Yeah.
Yes.
A lot of the way that like movies like Snow White were done were through rotoscoping, where they would like animate over live action movements. And so yeah, it's sort of like his like ultimate dream is like a synthesis. I mean, it's basically a Toontown and Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, that's the world he's created. So when we say we live in clown world or sort of cartoon world, we do,
right?
Quite literally. The company went bankrupt. Alice could not save the company. And so what do you do when you go bankrupt? You're a young guy. You're in, I think at this point they're in Kansas City. Yeah, Kansas City. You go bankrupt. What do, Brad? You move to Hollywood.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Right.
We're going to Hollywood. La La Land. You're gonna go make your dreams. So he's already gone bankrupt. That's the way to do a bankruptcy. Do a bankruptcy in a city, in a state you don't care about. Move. I'm sure he cared about it, but so he moved to Hollywood in July of 23 at 21 years old. And New York was the center of the cartoon industry, but Walt wanted to live in LA because his brother Roy was there. And Roy was trying to become a live action film director. Roy had tuberculosis at the time, would obviously recover. He could not sell Alice in Wonderland. They eventually got a contract for 6 Alice comedies, and they formed the Disney Brothers Studios, which would later become the Walt Disney Company. And so they convinced some of their animator colleagues to move out, and they hired a couple of fellows and dragged them along from Kansas City out to Hollywood.
That's ambitious.
Yeah. A lot like Kubrick, right? We're in New York City. I'm in the Bronx. Hey, I know a dentist. He's we're gonna go out. We're gonna go make a movie, right? Yeah. So in 1925, he hired Lillian Bounds, and they married. So he hired the woman who would later become his wife. So he gets married quite young, as you would at the time, and fast. So. Yeah, and I don't think it was a shotgun marriage. I think they were probably just ready to get at it. They were married at her brother's house in Lewiston, Idaho, and they really struggled with a number through the life, a number of miscarriages, and eventually. The marriage produced Diane in 33 and then Sharon, who they adopted in 36. And they didn't hide the adoption. All through this, they were careful to keep her out of the public eye because of the Lindbergh business. And he would hide he would hide his daughters away, because by the time that was happening in the 30s, I'm getting out of order here a little bit, but so I have a note here. About, let's see. This is something because we're almost at the mouse. There's a quote from Walt Disney where apparently he said, "I love Mickey Mouse more than any woman I've ever known."
Jeez, man.
So
no, but wait, is this before it made him rich and famous?
I think this was it must have been
or...
probably after. I would guess. I just thought that was quite funny. Yeah,
that is funny.
There is going to be a certain amount of misogyny in Disney as we move along. He wouldn't hire female animators because they could get pregnant and leave a project at the last minute. Yeah, he was definitely not ahead of his time on that front. So that's important. I'm reading here now from the Gabler book. Walt felt about women, no one could ever accuse him of infidelity or even of showing much interest in the opposite sex. Back when he was absorbed by his animations, he told Ward Kimball, "I love Mickey Mouse more than any woman I've ever known." And this is later sort of about his obsession with Disneyland and how that was his hobby. Rather than having affairs, he had an affair with his business and his company in Disneyland. Although there were some rumors that he had an open affair with an actress. Everybody knew, but these are sort of unfounded rumors. I couldn't get to the bottom of any of it. It was mentioned in some sort of audio I found on YouTube, but then I couldn't corroborate it in the Gabler book. So maybe it's in there, but in any case, Blauer, did you come across any of that? Any ideas of infidelity?
Well, it is interesting, and not to sort of add to the rumor and innuendo, but it is interesting how and maybe just because that was the time, and so what else would he be thinking about? But it is interesting that he specifies, "I love Mickey Mouse more than any woman I've ever known." And I'm not saying, and I don't think that was necessarily homosexual or anything, but I do think that he had more of a fascination with the male, specifically the boy form, in a kind of sort of, I guess maybe because he wanted to, I'm trying to be careful here. I don't want to make a lawsuit on you guys.
This is worse than Scientology, so you've got to really be careful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's because of his childhood and his sort of idealization of his simultaneous trauma of his childhood, but idealization. And so I think he identified more with boys, and that's why, and we'll get to it later, the Bobby Driscoll story, who he called he doted on and was in a certain sense infatuated with this kid. And then they had a weird falling out. And so anyway, that's what I was thinking about, the fact that he specifically said, "I love Mickey Mouse more than any woman I've ever known."
Interesting. Yeah. Well, so we're coming up to the big career breakthrough. But before we do, there was the issue of Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Are either of you familiar with Oswald and the drama around this?
I don't know about that.
He was drawn by what was his name?
Mintz, I believe. Was it Mintz?
Oh, well, there's another one. Maybe I'm not too
Oob Iwerks.
Oob Iwerks.
Yep.
Who he was involved in the project, and then later drew Mickey Mouse, and then later Iwerks and Disney had a huge falling out, and I sort of consider that moment the killing of the second owl, where after he sort of severed this, because the Iwerks guy, he was one of those animators who followed Disney from Kansas City to LA, and he was the primary guy who was responsible for the original look of those older cartoons. And so when they had their falling out, in the late 30s, early 40s, that was kind of representative of Disney, killing that second owl and getting into the sort of more covert kind of freaky deep state stuff.
Yeah, it starts here, right, with the creation of Mickey as an answer to the betrayal that this Ubi Iwerks fellow, he felt, Disney felt betrayed. So I have from the Gabler book. He would in later years talk often of this episode as a betrayal, saying he had warned Mintz that those who had turned on Walt would also turn on him someday, which in time they did. He told it just like the plot of one of those stories where good will win and the villain will be defeated, recalled one of his longtime animators. He loved telling that story because it was so poetically just. He would say that you had to be careful whom you trusted, and he had learned that you had to control what you had or it would be taken from you, that he had seen how duplicitous the business world could be. He said he had learned all these lessons and would never forget them. But as he and Lillian headed back to Los Angeles on the New York Central Cannonball with nothing but these lessons and the sunny bromides he was riding home to buck up Roy's spirits, the eternally optimistic Walt Disney, who had ridden out crisis after crisis, had one terrifying thought. He would have to begin all over again. So he had this deal with Universal in relation to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit with this film producer, Charles Mintz. And it all went to hell because the rights to Oswald were essentially taken from Disney. So he was left with nothing. And out of this comes this. So at the outset, Walt was furious. He was like a raging lion on the train coming home, Lillian would recall. All he could say over and over was that he'd never work for anyone again as long as he lived. He'd be his own boss. Lillian admitted that she had another response, not rage, but fear. She was in a state of shock, scared to death, since they had no source of income now and no idea of what the future held for them. Even before leaving New York, Walt said he had tried to devise a new character to replace Oswald without success. So we have a little bit more about this. Walt read the story of the Lindbergh business to Lillian, but she said she couldn't focus because she was upset by the name Walt had bestowed upon his character, his new mouse character, Mortimer. They were talking about the Lindbergh, the solo flight across the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. He wrote an idea for a scenario for a cartoon called Plane Crazy, about a mouse who would, inspired by Lindbergh, fly the Atlantic, right, to impress a lady mouse, as you do. Yeah. And she said she really didn't like the name. The only thing that got through to me, she told an interviewer, was that horrible name, Mortimer. I was afraid I made quite a scene about it. Too sissy, she said. When she calmed down, Walt asked her what she thought of the name Mickey, an Irish name, an outsider's name. I said it sounded better than Mortimer, and that's how Mickey was born.
Wow.
Yeah. So now we've got Mickey Mouse. So, all right, guys. When I say Mickey Mouse, when I say Steamboat Willie, what do you think? what do you remember? We're 1928. Steamboat Willie, the first sound cartoon. Can you remember it? Can you call it to your mind's eye, Blauer, if you had to?
I remember. I always think of the famous shot of him like at the wheel.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating about Mickey is he really is like the cartoon Chaplin.
Yes.
And so like I think, yeah, Mickey Mouse is basically Disney being like, well, I can't be Chaplin, but I can invent a Chaplin.
Right. Yeah.
I think he has that kind of impish tramp. And keyword on impish, because like in those early cartoons, nowadays Mickey Mouse is a family man who's all dignified and stuff. But in a lot of those early cartoons, he is kind of a mischievous mouse and then involved in kind of flim flam and just grandiose stunts and kind of like has like a weird like, it's like the classic carny vaudeville energy that like obviously all this stuff comes from.
Yeah, there's a famous cartoon where he's in a trailer with all his friends with the duck and Donald Duck, my favorite Donald Duck, and the other ones, and so it's Mickey, and he has his trailer, and he's preparing. He actually, it's this beautiful, wonderful scene with this trailer, and then the trailer folds up, and then they're actually in this like industrial wasteland. And there's all this, and Mickey, especially early, is quite awful to the other animals. He's abusive.
That bit you tweeted, was that from Steamboat Willie? The bit where he's playing the animals?
Yeah, he's playing the teats on the mama pig, and he kicks one of the baby pigs. He's not a nice guy.
No. I have to admit though, when I was scrolling and came across that you would. I laughed out loud. I thought there's something about it that just cracked me up. I don't know why. Here's one question I have. Why was it called Steamboat Willie, but it's Mickey Mouse? What is that about?
Darn, I don't know. I have no idea.
Because I've never actually seen it in full. I've seen snippets. I've seen like Blauer, you said, I've seen him at the wheel tapping his foot and all of that, but I don't actually know what the cartoon.
Yeah,
really
I mean, let's see if we can find out. Yeah, it should be Steamboat Mickey, but he's whistling a tune. This must be what it is. He whistles a tune, Steamboat Bill, so that'd be Steamboat Willie, right?
Yeah, it's a parody of the Buster Keaton movie.
Oh,
Steamboat
is that right?
Bill
Okay.
Jr.
I see. Okay.
Which, let's be honest, Steamboat Willie has a better ring to it than Steamboat Bill Jr.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. I was tempted to play a few minutes of this on the show, but I've decided not to do that.
Yeah, you've been advised by legal counsel.
Yeah. I mean, this is very famously the reason copyright laws are the way they are is because of the mouse. It's because of this mouse. Yeah. But a few things about this. So, of course, Mickey was voiced by Walt Disney from 28 to 47, and then from 55 to 62. So that is Disney doing the voice of the mouse. Can anybody do it? Does anybody dare do it? It's not that kind of podcast.
I can't do it. Squeaky.
Yeah. It is a very, very important breakthrough for Walt artistically. It's also the first sound cartoon.
And so how would it be presented? Do you know, would it be like before a movie?
It'd be a short that they would show in the theater before another film, presumably. Yeah. And the way that they would do the soundtracks, the music for these, there's some very solid interviews with Walt online. If you want to go, you can hear him talk for an hour or even more, on YouTube. He describes the process of making these and the tracks for these. Back in that day, this was brand new. It all had to be done with one track. The musicians all had to be hitting their notes. The VO all had to be hitting their notes at the same time. And it was like music. So it's, as things are going, it's
you got the Foley artist.
Yeah, everybody's there doing their whole thing, bopping along to it. And if one thing is out of place, it's like you got to take it again and lay it down again. So that's quite fun and interesting. Blauer, you have a note in here about this Ubi Iwerks fellow. What's the story here? Apparently he's the father of Mickey Mouse, but Disney took him to the cleaners.
Oh yeah, we touched on it a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I just find it fascinating that he was. Well, I guess there are two fathers since Disney voiced the Mickey, but yeah, it was Iwerks he was the one who put the pencil to paper and drew and embodied Mickey Mouse. And then later on they had like a partnership that was sort of, that they had like the creative partnership, that whereas Roy and Walt had like the sort of business and personal partnership. And then later on they had a big falling out I guess it wasn't that he was like screwed over in terms of like finances necessarily, although I'm sure there was some of that too. It was way more of like a personal and professional falling out where like at one point they were at some function, I guess, and like there's like a little girl there, and the girl went up to Disney because obviously Disney was like the more recognizable figure, and it was like, can you draw Mickey Mouse? And then Disney kind of brusquely handed the piece of paper to Iwerks and was like, here, you draw it.
Yeah.
And like I guess that's sort of what set off Iwerks just kind of being seen as, you know, just one of Disney's ultimately one of Disney's drawings in a way that he can just sort of like throw into any scenario and do with what he wanted. But yeah, he was the person who came up with the design of Mickey Mouse.
Got it. Right. Yeah. And that's such a pivotal thing in terms of Disney and his persona and what he would ultimately become, right? It's not America Land or Futureland. It ended up being Disneyland. Right. This is my land. There's a real vibe there. So these are good times. And I have some reading here about the vibe. And this is actually from, Iwerks is here. So this is after Mickey comes out. It's the Roaring 20s. It hasn't given way to the Depression quite yet. And the Mickey Mouse Club would actually start in 1930. If you go way back, they began the theater-based Mickey Mouse Club in January 11th in Ocean Park, California, with 60 theaters hosting clubs by March of 31. The club released its first issue of, like Apocalypse Confidential, of the official bulletin of the Mickey Mouse Club on April 15th, Tax Day. 1930. By 1932, really listen to this. By 1932, the club had 1 million members.
Oh.
And in 1933, the first UK club opened at Darlington's Arcade Cinema. They started to phase out the club in 35, but they would bring it back. That's a lot of kids buying those funny hats. And this is where those crazy pictures come from, the crazy, creepy pictures.
Where they're all sitting in the theater with the mask on?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And you can begin to feel in this the whispers of an awareness that it's not just about selling cartoons. We are a club. Right. And we're all going to come and sing along and be a part of it and wear the mask and wear the ears and all the rest of it. But getting back to the animators, these are good times. So Iwerks recalled, this is working at the studio, we'd hate to go home at night and we couldn't wait to get to the office in the morning. We had lots of vitality and we had to work it off. Though only a short time earlier, the atmosphere at the studio had been dismal, the success of the Mickeys lifted spirits. The animators could now play pranks on one another, pouring water on a chair as someone was about to sit in it, or putting cheese on the light under a colleague's animation board, or art gum eraser shavings in his pipe tobacco. But all the horseplay and jokes, Iwerks said, never got in the way of the work. We all loved what we were doing, and the enthusiasm got onto the screen. Indeed, when a reporter glowingly described the carefree atmosphere at Hyperion, the studio, Walt actually took offense, griping that one would gather we are nothing but a happy-go-lucky bunch of fellows without any system or organization about us, and that all I do is sit on my fanny and pass out the checks to the fellows. So there's Walt. A little grumpy about the press. Walt has an idea of how things are, and at that point, he's already kind of the master of the house. And but the animators are having a good time.
It's pretty cool for them. I mean, it's kind of a newish technology, a new medium. They're making a living at it. People that's exciting if you're one of those guys. You know?
Yeah. Well, we're getting into the 30s here for Walt, and things are not all rosy. You can maybe even catch it in that quote. He did have a mental collapse in 31, and a lot of it had to do with the miscarriages. You know, and that this is not all. I mean, you can imagine what it had. You know, what it must have been like to bring Mickey Mouse to life and to bring that into the world. I'm reading a website here saying let me see here. He was overworked. There was a lot of tension, and he eventually had a nervous breakdown. He took some time off with his wife, and it was when he came back, that's when he conceived of the idea of developing a full-length animated feature, which is, of course, what we know as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We're going to pause here to talk about Walt and some politics here, because in the 30s, Walt flirted with a Nazi organization. And this is probably where you get the business of him being an anti-Semite. Brad. So he was sympathetic and went to some of the meetings of, let's see, one moment here. I'm reading from a website. Yeah, go ahead.
This is like the mid 30s.
Mid 30s, yeah. So I'm just gonna quote here. This is pretty intense. So we'll read this. The rumors that Walt was a Nazi abound in the age of the internet. We've got rumors he was a Nazi. We have rumors he was a Spanish, the child of a Spanish lord and a lowborn. We have the rumor that he was cryogenically frozen. We've got these larger than life. There were characteristics of Nazism in his politics. He was a Nazi sympathizer, maybe. So famed Disney animator Art Babbitt, who worked closely with Disney, once claimed, as quoted in a book, in the immediate years before we entered World War II, there was a small but fiercely loyal following of the Nazi party. There were open meetings, anybody could attend, and I wanted to see what was going on myself. On more than one occasion, I observed Walt Disney and Gunther Lessing, his lawyer, there, along with a lot of prominent Nazi affiliated Hollywood personalities. Disney was going to these meetings all the time. So Disney went to some meetings of the German American Bund. The Bund, like you do. Yeah, okay. I mean, I think we have to remember too, not apologizing for this, just a little interlude here, but Hitler was at that time. He was on the cover of Life magazine at one point.
We're not talking the height of World War II. I mean, I don't know what they were talking about or whatever, but you gotta place these things in their time.
Nobody will ever mistake Walt Disney as a man of the left. No.
Right.
Fair to say, Blauer?
I mean, a part of it is, I think, his fascination with Nazism, and I was thinking about it when you were saying that, like, the Mickey Mouse Club reached 1 million members. I was like, well, that just sounds kind of like the Hitler Youth in a way. And that, like, I think he saw Hitler and the Nazis kind of doing the political version of what he was doing in entertainment. And that, like, it's like, well, obviously, because Hitler was a failed artist. And so it's sort of like megalomaniacs see each other, and whether they agree politically or not, although I kind of do, I think the evidence shows that Disney at least had some political sympathies. I think it's more that, well, we're operating at the same level as opposed to all these other people.
Wow.
Operating.
Right. Yeah. That's very insightful. Right. I see what you're doing over there, Hitler. Let me raise you a Mickey Mouse Club.
It's less about politics or entertainment and more about, like, reshaping reality is what they're going for.
And both are doing it in the form of a callback, right? Of a trying to to either return or bring forward a sort of idealized past, even though those pasts are a little
Exactly. And it's
different.
like, what are all of those? What are, like, up into, I think it's Sleeping Beauty is the last Disney cartoon that's like based on a European fairy tale. And like, what are all of those based on, and based in is like that sort of Germanic Alpine region of Europe. And so there is this kind of Teutonic sensibility to Disney in general. I mean, that Disney castle is based on the castle of that like mad Bavarian prince or whatever.
Is it Neuschwanstein? I think, is that what it is?
Yeah, Neuschwanstein or Schweinsveld or something.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's like well baked in the cake, this kind of, maybe he's not a Nazi sympathizer necessarily, but he is a sympathizer of this kind of militant Bavarianism or something.
Right.
All right. Okay. And that is why we had invited Blauer on for the Disney episode. Yeah. All right. Playing the hits. So very interesting. And we're gonna move forward a little bit here. And we're gonna move through time. So they would do the first color cartoon, Flowers and Trees. Have you seen Flowers and Trees, fellas? Can you remember that? It's the trees come to life. Yeah. And
I posted some stills from that actually about a week ago. And yeah, that's a wild one too. That's very sort of like a European pagan kind of. I mean, I guess they all are.
Well, and there's a real kind of quirky paganism underpinning a lot of the Disney business, isn't there? So Flowers and Trees, they win an Oscar for Flowers and Trees. He would win 22 Oscars in his life.
Whoa.
So no slouch.
Yeah.
He was nominated 59 times. So the real deal. And let's see. So his daughter's born, Diane. They do Three Little Pigs in 33. People tend to see Three Little Pigs through the lens of the Depression. That's happening. So these things are being put into sort of cultural context. Then we get the banger, the big one, Snow White, which was a very, very big deal when that came out. And
it holds up. I mean, it's what it is.
It really does. Yeah. When's the last time you watched that?
I mean, it's been a long, long time, but
yeah.
It looks good. And you have to think, live action films didn't have color for another 15, 20 years. And to sit in a theater and watch an hour and a half of a color film must have been like crazy.
Right. Yes. It must have blown their minds. I really believe that it must have blown their minds.
It's like true enchantment or spellbinding. Like it really is the apotheosis of cinema as like a kind of magical form. And what's fascinating to me about, I feel like I've been starting that a lot this podcast. What's fascinating to me, it's all fascinating.
You're crushing it. You're killing the game. Yeah,
what's fascinating to me is with an animated movie, when you watch that, and I actually watched, I did my homework and I watched Snow White this past weekend.
Nice.
Rewatched it rather, I've seen it a billion times in the past, but you realize just how with an animated movie, every single thing in the frame is deliberately there. Unless you're a perfectionist like Stanley Kubrick, listen to the Art of Darkness episode on Stanley Kubrick. But like with live action, a lot of the stuff that happens in a frame in a live action movie is just kind of there, whether by environment or whatever, unless it is truly a controlled set, like with Kubrick. But with an animated movie, it's like nothing is just accidentally in a frame.
Yeah.
Everything is meticulously drawn and arranged there. And that's what I find so incredible about these movies.
They really are worth revisiting. The early Disney is classic for a reason. They're incredible.
And the backgrounds are like fine art almost.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
they really are.
Yeah, they're gorgeous.
Same with like this is a tangent, but like same with like the Looney Tunes backgrounds, like with like the matte paintings by like I think it's like Chuck Jones or something like that. Like they like straight up are like not for who's the desert lady painter Virginia.
Georgia O'Keeffe.
Georgia O'Keeffe, yeah. Like they're like straight up like Georgia O'Keeffe style, like stark desert landscapes. It's incredible.
Yeah. So I want to arrive at a tragic moment in his life, but before I do, I need to lay the table here and really explain where they were. So I'm going to be reading from a few paragraphs here from the Gabler book. Donald Duck, who is my favorite, Donald Duck was not the only character at the studio to achieve stardom in the mid-30s. Awards and recognition had tumbled in for Walt. The Art Institute of Chicago exhibited 100 Disney drawings, which the Institute's director said constitute art in nearly every sense. I mean, it just goes on, right? The Writers Club of LA, they gave him, gold medals, blah, blah, blah. He was given let's see here. The Writers Club of LA had a dinner with Will Rogers and Chaplin in attendance. All right. So we're coming from the farm in Missouri. I'm going to dress up as Chaplin. Now Chaplin's in the audience when I'm getting an award. It's kind of mind blowing. He was given a gold medal. The Art Workers Guild of England, whose ranks included George Bernard Shaw, gave him a membership, the first for a filmmaker. We're talking A-list through the roof, just completely over the top. Everybody would visit him. I'm just going to read some of the names of the famous visitors who came to tour the studio. Douglas Fairbanks, Mary Pickford, H.G. Wells, Chaplin, Madeline Carroll, Ernst Lubitsch, Robert Benchley, Alexander Woollcott, Eisenstein, Sergei Eisenstein, who wrote that he was sometimes frightened watching Disney films, frightened because of some absolute perfection in what he does, and because Disney seemed to know all the most secret strands of human thought, images, ideas, feelings. Frank Lloyd Wright, Aldous Huxley, Igor Stravinsky, quoting from Dick Hoomer, everybody in the world beat a path to Walt's door. I mean, unreal.
How old? Wait, so this was what year? This is after Snow
This
White
is in the
comes out.
30s, so he's younger than he's in his early 30s.
Wow.
This is a rock star.
Yeah.
He's a rock star.
Wow.
Kind of amazing.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to, talk about that level of fame achieved that quickly. Kind of amazing. Well, now something kind of awful happened. We're getting up toward World War II. But there was a tragedy in relation to his mother and his father. Let me read what happened here. So of course they were from poverty, near poverty. They made a lot of success. Walt and Roy, they're out in Hollywood. They've made good, and they bought their parents a new home in North Hollywood, not far from the studios. The elder Disneys had only been there a few months when Flora started to complain of headaches and said she felt constantly ill. They suspected the furnace, so Walt sent over a handyman from his studio. Hey, Mom, I got my guy, to look into the matter. Whatever the handyman did, it wasn't enough. One November morning, the housekeeper felt woozy and went to get the Disneys out of the house. Walt's father, Elias, had collapsed in the hallway. Flora had fallen on the bathroom floor. They were able to revive Elias, but it was too late for Flora. She passed away from asphyxiation on November 26th of 1938 at the age of 70.
And this
Roy,
house that he bought them, like,
yes.
oh, that's rough.
Roy had an inspection done on the faulty furnace. Included in the write-up were these particularly awful words. Installation of the furnace showed either a complete lack of knowledge of the requirements of the furnace or a flagrant disregard of these conditions if they were known. And Walt felt terribly guilty. He refused to talk about the matter for the rest of his life to anyone. Even many years later, when his daughter asked where her grandparents were buried, he wouldn't discuss it.
Wow.
Well, so that's a pretty real life tragedy when you think about that. That's dark. Does not get any darker. Well, so we have Walt, famous, Roy, his right-hand man. They're doing, he's doing the books. He's the accountant. We're focused on animation. That's what we're doing. 1940 comes around, and in 1 year, they release Pinocchio and they release Fantasia. What do you remember about Pinocchio, Brad?
Oh, Pinocchio is great. Pinocchio is fantastic. Pinocchio I did watch in the last few years, and Pinocchio holds up. Like it's hilarious and charming and deeply symbolic and bizarre. Like it's borderline surrealism in a lot of ways. It's just fantastic.
Yeah. Blauer, what's your take on Pinocchio?
My main memory of Pinocchio is the whale, and I always loved the whale because as a child, and I guess now too, I am obsessed with the movie Jaws. And so like I love any sort of gigantic sea behemoth. And so I was always struck by the whale in Pinocchio. And don't they like light a fire inside it and it starts like spewing like smoke or whatever? So yeah, extra resonant.
Yeah.
Well, Jaws, man. I mean, don't get me started on Jaws.
That's Kevin's favorite movie.
Oh, for sure. I mean, you and I, we could geek out. I went on Forest of Symbols podcast, and he begins the podcast with the Jaws theme, which tickled me.
I started that the other night, and I heard
good.
that, and I was like,
tickled me pink. I was so happy.
yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe
that was my Mickey Mouse impression there.
And Jordan Peterson has made a bunch of Patreon money off of his love of Pinocchio, I believe.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So maybe we can dip into some Pinocchio money.
Just when you thought it was safe to get back in the water.
that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
I didn't know I had that in me. We all have the mouse. Oh no, it's the MK Ultra trigger. Oh no, Mr. Kautzman.
That's right. Wake up with you do that, and then you pass out, and you wake up with a gun in your hand for some reason.
Right. No, Your Honor, I have no recollection of the night of Well, so I want to talk a little bit about what he wanted to do with Fantasia, and then we'll talk a bit about Fantasia. So
I didn't realize Fantasia was so early in the films. Like
it feels later, doesn't it?
It does. It's great. It's a bold choice, really.
Yeah, and it was initially called the concert feature. So he was talking about it. He said, "We're not making an ordinary cartoon, and I feel that we've got the wrong slant on this stuff. I don't believe in this gag stuff." So he wants to move away from the gags. He wants to move away from the vaudeville business of the very early stuff. So he's looking to do something very higher than the sentimental fantasy. He would never have called himself an artist. He was too skeptical of culture and too plain spoken for that. But he did want to make art, if only because that was the natural evolution for him. He thought the concert feature, he thought Fantasia was going to certifiably be art. Quoting, "They're worried about the highbrow angle," he groused at a story meeting after having lunch with RKO, the distributor. "The only thing I'm worried about is that it might be a little too lowbrow. If you put dopey in it, they would say swell." So he wants to make something that's just completely intense. So he's saying, there are things in that music, talking about the Bach toccata and fugue in D minor. There are things in that music that the general public will not understand until they see the things on the screen representing that music. Then they will feel the depth of the music. Our object is to reach the very people who have walked out on this toccata and fugue because they didn't understand it. I am one of those people. But when I understand it, I like it. So he has a very big mission. And if you recall Fantasia, there are those whole sequences where the music is mapped to the visuals and you have this synesthetic representation. Right? Can you remember that?
It's funny that he frames it as a rejection of his earlier sort of gag short sensibility, when it is closer in spirit to that as opposed to like these narrative sentimental fantasies. Because like what are those original like gag shorts called? They're called silly symphonies. Mm-hmm. And so there is what it is that it's a synthesis of image, and especially in this case drawing and sound, and it's, I don't know, I'm trying to reach for what I'm trying to say here, but it is much more in like the original like old sense of cinema as a kind of short form like artistic style that lets you commune, I guess, to use the grandiose word for it, commune rather than watch, commune with this kind of perennial artistic tradition, if that makes any sense. I'm thinking mainly of, and sorry, I'm rambling here.
No,
I'm thinking mainly of like, I've been obsessed, especially this Halloween season, obsessed with like the different like silent and pre-code horror Facebook groups I'm in, and like they post this stuff that's like basically like pinhole like peep shows, basically like non-pornographic, but they're still peep shows like in the old Nickelodeon style from like the 1900s that are like glimpse into, you know, the inferno of Dante's hell, and it's like this grandiose phantasmagoria. And I feel like Fantasia is a kind of return to that sensibility of cinema, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can see that. And by the end of Fantasia, right, it has the Walpurgisnacht is the final bit of Fantasia.
Is that what plays during the Sorcerer's Apprentice bit?
No, the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I don't know all the music, and we can look it up. But the Walpurgisnacht is the night when the dead rise from the grave.
Oh, okay.
And it is very interesting how it's introduced, because I suspect that like hardcore Christians probably were a little sus of Disney from day one.
It would be interesting to look into. Yeah,
I guarantee it, because when you look at Night on Bald Mountain is what it is. It's literally Satan. Is playing with the souls of the dead have risen from the grave. And then it's followed by Ave Maria, but it's a very kind of neutral, again, kind of a pagan look of like at the dawn and the sunrise. Yeah, you have, it goes, the segments are Toccata and Fugue in D minor, Nutcracker Suite, Sorcerer's Apprentice, Rite of Spring, which is just absolutely wild. And the Rite of Spring is the one where the conductor introduces it as if it's a representation of human history, like deep history. So you have a generation of people for whom I suspect this is probably the largest or one of the largest representations of the concept of like dinosaurs to begin in a widespread way. It must have blown minds, but it also shaped the world and how we look and see the world.
Well, it's like also like a continuation of like older traditions of like oral storytelling of like cosmology and like how, you know, the world came to be. Like it's like a 20th century redux of that, like almost like tribal primeval cosmology.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Fascinating. Indeed. Well, so all is not well at Disney Studios around this. He's running a very tight ship. And are you, one or both of you, familiar with his labor problems? You know anything about this?
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, let's learn about it. So we're getting into the early 40s here. Something had changed, something ineffable but important that undermined this sense of happiness and contentment. After the initial flush of appreciation, some employees began to feel as if the studio were too good, too perfect. The collegiate atmosphere became almost oppressive, one employee complained. Another recalled, everything looked so nice, I almost felt like wearing a tie. Before the studio moved to Burbank, Joe Rosenberg, the banker, had warned Walt vaguely that the new plant would be so nice you will cause discontent. He was right. Some charged it to a new sense of impersonality now that the studio was bigger and more routinized. So now Disney's having growing pains, and the artists, the animators, beginning to realize how much power they have, and they're being forced into Walt's idea of sort of the sterile corporate world that he aspires to create, and which we associate with Disney. Disney's greatest creation, finally, is the corporation, as we understand it, the modern multimedia, multinational corporation.
Yeah, and in that sense, there's always been a pairing in my mind with him and Henry Ford that I never quite understood. Like they're kind of the same guy to me somehow, and I never quite understood it. But you're kind of hitting that a little bit.
Yeah, Disney was the imagination factory,
right?
The image factory,
right?
Yeah. Well, so his animators went on strike. So it is 1941. May 28th, strike, 6 a.m. today, read the first entry in his desk diary. Apparently, the strike actually began the next day. It was May 28th to 29th. The atmosphere that morning was both festive and festering. His enemy had Sorrell had the picketers crowding the gate while loudspeakers blasted music and messages at the employees driving through. Somebody wrote, cars stopped all the way along Buena Vista Street, which fronted the studio. The guys were pouring their individual speeches into the ears of those on the fence. It was apparently a very, very big strike. As Walt himself entered the gates that morning, easing his way through the throng in his Packard and genially waving to the strikers, Babbitt grabbed a megaphone from actor John Garfield, who was on the picket line to support the strike, and yelled, Walt Disney, you should be ashamed of yourself. Then, as Babbitt told it, he turned to the crowd and shouted, there he is, the man who believes in brotherhood for everybody but himself. When the crowd cheered, Walt bolted from the car and took off after Babbitt until he was restrained.
Oh my gosh.
Walt was much more sanguine behind the studio's gates. Yeah. Well, so this was quite an intense moment for Walt. He's running what people are, they're sort of upset about the way that he's running the business.
Well, and this is part of it. This is part of a more general sort of labor unrest too. I mean, I'm not a historian of that by any means, but yeah, I think this was, a battle and a larger war of labor generally going on at the time.
Right. I mean, and I'm reading from a Newsweek article here now. He pulled down a weekly salary of he was making $32,000 a week. And he was contemptuous of his work. Well, he was $32,000 a week in today's money.
Oh, that's
that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. Yeah,
Pretty good.
you don't want for anything, right? And you own the company. So not only are you drawing a huge salary, you own the company.
Yeah.
And he was contemptuous. He used a bunch of harsh language. He berated them. He would blame them for not bettering themselves. So now we have that figure of the guy who's like, well, pull yourself up through your bootstraps. I did it too. And not realizing that not everybody's going to be Walt Disney.
Right.
So there was a strike. There was physical violence. Disney removed himself to South America, took a 10-week vacation. This gets in, I think, to some of the government business. We'll talk about it. He left the problems at the studio to Roy. His brother settled. He gave the workers whatever they wanted. Now, Disney was disillusioned, distrustful of the environment. He developed a private file on all those who had been unfriendly toward him. And he imagined communists, and probably there were some communists lurking behind the scenes. He was furious. But in 1947, I'm jumping around because we're going to jump back to the wartime, which is super important. But he appeared as a friendly witness before the Un-American Activities Committee, and he named Sorel a communist. So he was on that side of the aisle. Now, Blauer, let's talk about Disney in World War II and South America and the propaganda films and all the rest of it. Let's go.
Well, I feel like this is sort of and maybe to continue the analogy, maybe this isn't the killing of a third owl, or it's like a resurrection of some kind of evil owl demon or something like that.
Yeah.
Because this is sort of the hinge point where Disney really gloms on to whatever we want to call the system or state or whatever, and becomes this huge thing, multinational Mickey Mouse octopus that we know and are forced to love.
Yeah.
Because, in the face of these strikes, and I think they were having like another bankruptcy scare. I think I read that like Disney, not the company, but personally was like always like having like financial problems or like financial like fears. And so he was just like he felt like he was always on the verge of just like losing everything. And that goes back to also the fear of dying at 35. So he was always in the sense of real or perceived precarity, and he would always reach for any life vest or any sort of rescuing arm, even if that arm belonged to Uncle Sam. And so, yeah, he begins doing propaganda films for the United States government for World War II. And it's crazy the degree to which Disney Studios did this, because, other studios, like they did like, war movies and sort of like docu propaganda movies. Like John Ford did some like Pacific Theater kind of documentary flicks. So like it was obviously like a full scale thing in Hollywood, but like Disney Studios completely halted any commercial filmmaking. I think maybe Dumbo was like their last one in 1941, which is my personal favorite Disney film. And just devoted themselves full time to pushing the war effort. And I feel like this is sort of when he really got, in the words of James Ellroy, my favorite author, jungled up with certain like intelligence agencies, and definitely confirmed he was like an informant for the FBI with Hoover, and for the OSS, which later became CIA, which will figure later into the establishment of Disney World. So this is really the birth of Disney as not just an artist or commercial entity, but as like a para-political operation.
Yeah,
right.
a
And so
wing of the regime.
so it's not just like, well, everybody's kind of doing their duty, and our duty is to make a couple little movies to help. It's like full on, like, yeah, basically a branch of the government. That's
this is when, you know, if you want to get moralistic or religious about it, this is more or less when he sold his soul,
right?
Or what soul he had left, if you want to go that way.
Yeah.
Sold his soul and basically turned Disney into the psychological warfare branch of the deep state.
Interesting.
Puff in your joint now.
Yeah, that's right.
Warriors.
Yeah, and we're going to go even deeper into this area of inquiry, this line of inquiry on the After Dark episode for Patreon subscribers after the episode proper, artofdarkpod.com, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. I'm excited. This stuff really gets me jazzed up, and the whole strange mind control, MK Ultra, Alice in Wonderland, all of these things kind of weaving together this idea of mass mind control and how do you manipulate entire portions of the population, entire populations to achieve your political end. So in World War II, they talk, so Newsweek has this little article, oh, he went to South America for 10 weeks, right? Yeah, one of the most powerful people in the world just went to South America. Well, no, there was a lot more to this. They wanted him to, a big part of the World War II propaganda effort was to enhance ties in this hemisphere in the hopes that South America would not side with the Axis during the war. And so Disney produced some films during that period that were to sort of encourage comity between North America and Central and South America. These trips are not just like, he wasn't just lying on a beach. He was meeting with very, very heavy people. Fair to say, Blauer? Fair to say, is that in line with what you with what you've learned?
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, South America is its whole other ball of wax in terms of like CIA and OSS stuff. So like going on like a vacation to South America for 10 weeks, and then like he made that, like, what is that one?
Oh, it's three Caballeros.
Yeah. That's like totally in line with the ongoing ops in Latin America.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm going to read a few paragraphs about this from the book. The irony for Walt Disney was that for all the shortcuts and economizing it had imposed, the war was the one thing that was saving his business. Had he been dependent on his features and shorts, the studio almost certainly would have been driven into bankruptcy and forced to close. It wasn't that Walt was making much on the government work. He was sort of charging them cost. The studio, partly out of patriotism and partly out of naivete, was still asking the government only for cost. And that enraged his money man, right? So Walt, it's so interesting, right? You've got this fellow who forged a document in order to get into World War I. Now he's a big man and he's very, very eager to do the government's bidding, almost to his own detriment. Very interesting sort of case study here. Let's see here. There was one more irony. Though he had been failing as a commercial filmmaker, by the end of 1942, Disney had become the leader of government movie production. Quoting him, "This past year has been not only one of the most exciting," he wrote his uncle, "but one of the most exhausting I have ever experienced. Since last January, when we made the income tax picture for the Treasury Department, we have plunged into a type of work I never expected to touch. The plunge included nearly 300,000 feet of film produced that year, up from a pre-war total of 30,000, which was why the shortcuts were so necessary. Over 75% of the studio's output was now targeted for the government. With the training films demonstrating the educational potential of motion pictures, Walt was also increasingly recognized as, in
Right.
Fortune's words, one of the great teachers of all time. But even as Walt put a gloss on this renown and called it a great opportunity to show what our medium can do, it was a far, far cry from the things he had always wanted the medium to do. At times, it seemed we had slipped over a parallel but slightly altered universe, was how studio executive Harry Tittle put it, where the usual rules were changed or no longer applied. Tittle was right. They had changed.
Reality reshaping.
Yes. Yeah. Reality being like shifting and moving around them in the wake of this chthonic force of World War II. Well, so there's a note here from you, Blauer, about Bobby Driscoll, who is one of the stars who was caught in the wreckage of Disney and his life. Can we talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, he was let's see. He was, well, I guess this is a little bit earlier, but we can do this now, just sort of as a case study. He was the animation model and voice of Peter Pan, which is very resonant for certain mind control things. And then obviously he was in their live action movies like Song of the South and Treasure Island. And
that's the model for Peter Pan.
Disney say about him.
That's
basically Disney was sorry. Walt often referred to Driscoll with great affection as the living embodiment of his own youth. So there's that idealization of his youth. And that he was his favorite live action child star. And then in a kind of seems like a breakup scenario, following the completion of Peter Pan during a project meeting, Disney was like, you know what? I don't really see Driscoll as a likable protagonist anymore, but rather as a young bully, which sounds like a jilted kind of perspective. Like, you know, you're a young bully. You're not likable anymore.
What a thing to hear from one of the most powerful men in the world.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And like when you're like,
it's a pattern repeated over and over. Yeah, they kind of get disposed of, and they get used up and disposed of.
12 or something.
Oh God. Yeah.
Or not 12. He would have been like 15 or 16, but still bad.
Yeah, that's awful. Maybe even worse.
Yeah, because like at that point you're arguably even more impressionable when you're a teenager than when you're like in pre-adolescent. But yeah, and so then he sort of escaped the Mickey Mouse castle, or was ousted from the Mickey Mouse castle. And
Neuschwanstein, yeah.
Exactly. And he did his general guest spots, and he kind of got involved in the avant-garde scene, and he was sentenced to prison for drug use. And then, with all of his money gone, his body was discovered on March 30th, 1968, in an abandoned tenement in the East Village, like in basically just a cot in some abandoned building. And like I think he was like surrounded by 2 empty beer bottles and religious pamphlets. And he died of his drug use that had affected his heart. And his unclaimed body was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave in New York City's Potter's Field. Yeah, that was Disney's favorite boy. That was Disney's embodiment of his childhood, buried in a pauper's grave.
Another dead owl.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the dead owl right there. Boy. Well,
I mean, you see that model today. Like you have like all these former Disney stars and former Mickey Mouse Club stars who they have this squeaky clean image and then instantly turn on a dime and become kind of lewd, lascivious pop stars.
Britney.
And then, the better of them, they, the lucky ones, they kind of grow out of that and become, mature artists of a certain sort. But the other ones, they just wither away or just sort of languish.
Yeah. Yes. Well, so Disney comes out of the war, and now having turned the studio into kind of like a live action training operation, in addition to the cartoon propaganda, they turn to live action. And they release something called Seal Island, which is one of the first environmental films. And this sentiment, we skipped over Bambi. Bambi was a big deal when it came out. I believe it came out in 1942, right kind of in the thick of the war. That was a very big deal. And of course, Bambi has this environmentalist kind of a vibe to it, right? The hunters are sort of bad in that film, and it turned a generation of people off of the idea of like, oh my God, you're not going to go out and kill Bambi's mom, are you? Right. And of course, you have the dead mother there. And all of it. Bambi is a very strange movie. If you watch it, the plot is odd, and there's sort of this multiple ex machina type situations where just Bambi's dad, Bambi's baby daddy, like shows up and just sort of saves the day. It's not entirely even clear how Bambi's character develops. It's just Bambi. Does that ring true? I don't know how long it's been since you've seen it, Blauer. Bambi's a weird, yeah.
It's been a while since I've seen it. Although it is funny because still to this day, when I'm talking to my mom, shout out to my mom.
Blauer mom.
Like yeah, exactly. Blauer mom. Like if I, may go back to my place after hanging out with her or whatever, like I will say, made it, mother. After Bambi saying that. So I guess that's kind of macabre because obviously the mother doesn't make it, but maybe I gotta unpack that. Maybe.
Yeah. We drilled right into your trigger. We found it. Yeah, it's there. No, it's an interesting one. I rewatched it, and it's not my favorite. It's beautiful. It's not my favorite. But so we have Seal Island. He wins an Oscar for Seal Island.
I've never even heard of Seal Island.
Seal Island. It's we can look it up on the Wikipedia right now.
Oh, no, we don't have to spend time.
No, but I mean,
it's interesting that there's so much that big stuff like that can fall through the cracks. Yeah,
it's a documentary film, and it began their true life adventures. Nature documentary, won an Oscar for best short subject, 2 reels. So this would be, you'd go into the theater on a hot day. The theater would be the only place to have air conditioning. You'd go in, and they'd show these before the feature, and you'd spend 4 hours in the cinema, right? So moving along here, Cinderella, right? One of my personal favorites, the story of Robin Hood. Amazing. You noticed, it's so good.
Yeah, Robin Hood's great.
Just love it. Me and my mutuals, Robin Hood. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Well, that's the first. I don't know. Peter Pan may have come before it. That was the first that was a little bit more of a masculine storyline, really. Right? I mean, of the ones you've mentioned, of the animated features, you've got Snow White. You've got Bambi. You've got what else is
Cinderella.
But that's the first one Cinderella. That's the first one that feels like a rollicking masculine adventure.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's also a love story as well. All of these things are so musical as well, and to my mind, this is the golden age. It does not get better than this. That early stuff is fantastic too, but this stuff is just great. Robin Hood. Then in 1953, you got Peter Pan. And you have an interesting thing that's happening here where there's clearly a turn toward the UK. I think they realized that they had an international audience. So Peter Pan is set in London, right? Or begins in London. Later, you would have Dalmatians in London. It feels like the world opens up a little bit more, right? You have Robin Hood, very English story. I like how the accents in Robin Hood are just so totally all over the place. It doesn't make any sense, but it also doesn't make any sense that a bear is hanging out with a fox.
Well, I think it's also important to note that, like, at this time period, that, like, after the drama of the animator strike and the sort of, obviously coasting along alive and the sort of deep state stuff with World War II propaganda stuff, by this point, Disney has kind of retreated from like the sort of animation side in terms of, personally Disney, and that like he has kind of devoted himself beyond live action or animation and is like way more interested. And it's like, I've reshaped the imagination of the American public, and now I want to reshape the landscape. And so there is this excerpt that I read, and I think I linked it in the outline, that like ended with him like turning back to his interest in trains. And I think that sort of signifies this is really when he ramps up building Disneyland as like his like physical fiefdom.
Yes, and things are starting to begin to bleed into one another, where it's pretty clear that the productions that they're doing, the cartoons that they're doing it with an awareness that there's merch and there's tie-ins, and we're creating a totalizing Disney experience. Without a doubt, you've got 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which is this big live action goof with Kirk Douglas.
That's actually one of my favorites. I love that one. That's a great one.
2 Academy Awards: Best Art Direction, Best Special Effects, and that's 54. Now you have Davy Crockett at this time too, and this is all happening around the time of Disneyland kicking off. Davy Crockett was a 5-part serial. It aired on ABC from 54 to 55. Now, to get Disneyland built, they were down, I believe it's Roy who was quoted as saying, they were down to 1 car for the family. They had mortgaged it. They had mortgaged everything to put this park together. It's not easy to buy a ton of land in California, right, at any time, and to make this park. And so they cut a deal with ABC. ABC had come to them for years wanting shows. Well, TV's a lot different from film, and they wouldn't do it. Well, finally, they agreed, and I think as part of that, they had a loan written, or they were given a part of the deal was they'd be advanced, I think it was $500,000 in order for them to finish the park. Well, so now you see how this all kind of works together with the Capitol. So Capitol wants one thing, you're going to do it kind of grudgingly, but it's going to dovetail into the other thing that you really want to do. Davy Crockett is a great example of this. I think it's one of 2 shows that they promised ABC. They promised ABC the Mickey Mouse Club, which the Mickey Mouse Club was revived and put on television so it could reach even more impressionable brains. And then the Davy Crockett show. Now, this blew my mind. I rewatched some of this Davy Crockett stuff. All the new Disney stuff on Disney Plus comes with a trigger warning. Dumbo has a trigger warning.
Oh, if it was made before like 1962 or something, right? It's all like,
right.
You may encounter something that ruffles your feathers. And
yeah. Well, so listen, the show sparked heated debate, with many questioning whether Crockett was really deserving of the amount of attention that he was receiving. Letter writers also questioned the series' historical accuracy. Who cares? The show was really popular. They were combined into a feature-length movie in 55. These fellows, the guys who made the film, toured the United States, Europe, and Japan. Hugely popular. Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, right? You remember this, yeah. This is what struck me. By the end of 1955, Americans had purchased over, in today's money, this is actually in 2001 money, so it's even less, $2 billion worth of Davy Crockett merch.
Wow.
That's a lot of coonskin caps. That is all in various wasteland dumps.
Oh, yeah.
Unreal. B. That's a B.
Yeah, that's
merch.
wild.
And that, to me, when I was researching this, that's the moment. I'm sure it had already happened before, but I think they realized we can tie in. We got ABC. We're reaching millions.
Oh, yeah. You make that kind of money, and it then guides all of your project decisions from then. You got to say, well, is there an opportunity to make a gang of money selling something from this, right?
No question.
Stuffed animals, whatever. Yeah.
No question.
Yeah.
Well, so I want to talk about a couple of things about Disneyland, but Blauer, it looks like you have a few things here. So Disneyland opened in 55. What's some of the background of this, some of the ooky spooky business?
Well, and this isn't even necessarily ooky spooky. It can get ooky spooky if you want it to, and I think you do want to. But what is confirmed is that they partnered with or commissioned SRI, which is the Stanford Research Institute, which is famous for doing remote viewing and like astral projection experiments in the 70s. And like doing all kinds of other weird tech and like pseudo paranormal stuff for military and intelligence agencies throughout the Cold War. But they commissioned SRI to basically find the optimal like spot for Disneyland Park and like the optimal just everything about it. They wanted, it to be optimized for everything. And one of the guys that was like, they had like 2 point men like Harrison Pierce or Price and C.V. Wood, Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood, who was interested in ley lines and was a student of Alfred Watkins, who popularized the sort of paranormal idea of ley lines, which basically is like this sort of paranormal magical idea of like lines in the earth that give energy, very woo-woo kind of modern, like proto new age kind of thing. And so this is confirmed that one of the lead guys in designing the park or finding the right place for the park was involved in that kind of like magical geology kind of thing. And so basically
that's amazing.
Yeah. And so basically amazing. The extrapolation is there's a book about it by Walter Bosley called Latitude 33, because Disneyland is on Latitude 33 so it's Latitude 33 Keys of the Kingdom. And his whole argument is that Disneyland was specifically designed by the Stanford Research Institute fellow or whatever to like optimize like the weird telluric energies of these ley lines, and that like one of like the central points of where like these certain lines converge is that like the King Arthur carousel in Disneyland, which allegedly, I haven't been in a long time, but allegedly has all kinds of weird symbols to it. So
Yeah. Well, and don't you have Club 33, or was that in?
you have Club 33 in like the New Orleans square. And so and there's like all kinds of other like weird lore and like hidden information about the parks. You have like confirmed that there are like vast networks of tunnels underneath the parks.
Whenever there's tunnels, whenever there's secret tunnels, my ears perk up for sure.
Yeah. And of course their explanation is, well, that's just for the cast members and the janitorial and maintenance to go back and forth. But it's like, come on, you have like a veritable like underground city underneath the city, basically, that you've already built.
Right.
It's
so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting. Well, so when this park opened, it was not a great day. And let me see. They called the.
Did they consult? I mean, did they consult the astrological charts to make sure that
we could go back and look, couldn't we? Yeah. The opening of Disneyland was called Black Sunday. Disneyland opened on July 17th, 1955, in Anaheim, California. Forged tickets. So there's some comeuppance for his World War I forgery. Forged tickets were bringing more visitors than anticipated, adding to a line that trailed 7 miles long. With temps soaring up to 100 degrees, the new asphalt was melting women's high heels. Drinking fountains were defunct thanks to a plumber's strike, and some of the rides malfunctioned. Critics blasted the opening, calling it Black Sunday.
Wow.
Yeah. So
not a good start.
Nope. Welcome to Disney World. Disneyland.
Making a movie is a lot different than trying to run something like that, right? That's
But now it's iconic. Now you can't imagine Disney without the theme park, and it is the granddaddy of them all. They're all based on this. It's an entirely new concept. I've never been to land, but as a child, I was taken to Disney World, where the programming was enhanced.
Well, and it's like in like a meta way, the fact that the opening was so terrible just sort of like fuels the narrative of it as this magical place. It's sort of like, after going through the trials and tribulations of asphalt that melted high heels and no working water fountains, look at us now.
You're right. Yeah. It just contributes to the myth, right?
Yeah. So it's like, if you're an especially paranoid person, it's like maybe that's what the astrological sign said. Put it on the worst day possible.
Right. Yeah. I wouldn't put it past them. I have a few things to read. Yeah. It could have been. Yeah. So Walt delegated the running of the park to subordinates while he remained the chief strategist. And as always, he kept shuffling the positions whenever he detected that someone was arrogating too much power to himself. But while executives came and went, the park's press agent told a New Yorker reporter that Walt was clearly in command. You never know when you'll bump into Walt prowling around the park in an old sweater, checking on whether a dead light bulb you reported earlier has been replaced, the agent said, or timing the rides, or complaining that a ride not operating today sign is inartistically lettered, or plotting what to tear down next and what to put up instead. And though Walt did appoint the operations committee to deal with the day-to-day operations of the park and the management committee on which he himself sat to make policy and set long-term goals, the agent stressed, the first thing you have to understand is that this whole place is Walt. I'm not done. You gotta, we're gonna get to Khrushchev and an international incident in relation to Disneyland. Buckle up for this one. By the time Walt installed the Matterhorn, the monorail, and the submarine ride, the park was attracting over 5 million visitors a year and was considered one of the essential destinations in the country for foreign dignitaries. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru of India told LA Mayor Samuel Yorty that the main reason he was visiting the area was to see Disneyland. And Nehru's daughter said, "We look forward to Disneyland as much as anything on our trip." Nehru spent 3 hours there. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, in extending Indonesian President Sukarno's thanks to Walt after a visit, wrote, "I am told that in Indonesia there are two prominent Americans who are affectionately known by their first names, Ike and Walt. One African president continued his visit even after his PR officer keeled over and died of a heart attack while dining at the park's Plantation restaurant." Now,
Oh my God.
the passion of foreign dignitaries to see what was now one of America's landmarks was so intense that once it even triggered an international incident. Russian Premier Nikita Khrushchev was making a tour of America in September 1959. Khrushchev's wife, Nina, had seen a Disney film in 1942, found herself entranced, and requested that during the visit, she and her family be allowed to see Disneyland. One film, 1942, 17 years later, it's going to cause World War III. Walt and Lillian planned to welcome the party and escort them around the park. But when Khrushchev arrived in LA from New York, he was told that his security could not be assured and that the trip to Disneyland would have to be canceled. Khrushchev exploded, as the New York Times described it. "I would very much like to go see Disneyland," he shouted. "But then we cannot guarantee your security," they say. "Then what must I do? Commit suicide?" Continuing to boil, Khrushchev.
That's pretty dramatic.
It's a little much. So Russian. Khrushchev asked the gathered journalists, "What is it? Is there an epidemic of cholera or something? Or have gangsters taken hold of the place that can destroy me?" He was still fuming at a star-studded luncheon in his honor at the 20th Century Fox studio. LA Police Chief William Parker said because Mrs. Khrushchev had passed her husband a note while he spoke, reminding him of the insult. "We have come to this town where lives the cream of American art," he began as his voice shook with indignation. "And just imagine, I, a premier, a Soviet representative, when I came here to this city, I was given a plan, a program of what I was to be shown and whom I was to meet. But just now I was told that I could not go to Disneyland." He closed, "I cannot find words to explain this to my people." It goes on. But Khrushchev went even further, denied his visit. He told an LA audience that he could return to Russia even faster than he had arrived. "If you want to go on with the arms race, very well," he warned. "We accept that challenge. As for the output of rockets, well, they are on the assembly line. This is the most serious question. It is one of life or death, ladies and gentlemen, one of war and peace. And this serious question about the fate of civilization was raised all because Nikita Khrushchev had been, as he put it, deprived of the pleasure of visiting the city of fantasy."
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I guess when you're a Soviet, you see the name Disneyland, and you're like, "Oh yes, this is like our Leningrad," you know.
Right.
It tracks for them.
Right.
Well, it does sound like it was almost getting the way you described it. If I had never heard the word Disney, I would think you're describing like a new country that had just formed of some sort, right? And now the dignitaries are sort of wanting to open diplomatic relations with this new country that happens to be a theme park. It's fascinating.
It really is. And we are coming into the final act of this episode of Art of Darkness. We will go on the After Dark episode. We're arriving at the end of Walt's time on this earth. We have a little more here from Blauer about the CIA. He began to envision Disney World, so an even bigger Disneyland, a second park in Florida. In 61, in 60, Pollyanna, Swiss Family Robinson came out. In 61, The Absent-Minded Professor came out, in addition to 101 Dalmatians, which is a classic. It's just a classic. It's fantastic. It really holds up. It's jazzy. It has a sense of humor. It's adult but appealing to kids. It's almost a perfect film. It really is. And you've got the Mickey Mouse Club, as we know it, MICKEY, that has kicked off. It's a television show, the whole 9 yards. It's all happening, and he's turning his attention now to this second park. So let's get into that a little bit, Blauer. I had read that he that he hired CIA guys to help him get the land for Disney World, and he had to do it through a bunch of shell companies, because if landholders discovered that Disney was buying this land, property values, like, they would have held out and they would have raked them over the coals. That's about what I know about Disney World. But what did you learn here?
Well, that's about it. And they called it the Florida Project. And yeah, it wasn't exactly CIA, but it was, so they hired this like firm, and the two people were Wild Bill Donovan, who is more or less the father of the CIA, and Paul Hellowell, he was the main point man for the Florida Project, and he had been involved in like all kinds of CIA ops in Guatemala and Cuba and all that stuff. And of course, the axiom goes, you're never really former CIA.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, more or less hiring CIA to, do what you said, like set up shell corporations, like to the extent of like creating fake towns and like fake town charters to like keep property taxes low. And like this was all like a duplication of what Hellowell had done in Guatemala to instigate the coup in Guatemala in 1953. And like this isn't just a case of like, sometimes a corporation will hire like an ex-military man to like straighten up the ship and like do, run it like a boot camp and like, keep, everything tiptoe and stuff like that. That's one thing, but like this was operationally in like every sense of the word identical to the CIA playbook of doing coups d'etats in Central and South America, but this was in Florida.
That's fascinating. Yeah, like you could, if you're if you consider that a rogue CIA cell, you could be in another part of the CIA and get some intel across your desk, and you're thinking, I think someone's trying to take over Florida. Like, I think
some shadowy cabal is trying to amass power in Florida.
There's a mouse. Right. There's a mouse trying to take over. Their flag is a mouse. What can it mean?
That's wild.
Yeah.
Huh. Well, and then you've got the CIA baked into the operation, right? So now, if there is something nefarious to Disney World, they're there from the get-go, right? There's all kind, Disney has to be a psyop to some extent, right? So
yeah,
it's there right from the first shovel in the ground. Well, before that.
Well, and so now
you can't help but think about Florida's proximity to Cuba and like all the weird like Cuban exile unrest, like in the 60s, and JFK assassination. It gets into a whole thing.
Yeah, it could certainly be like a surveillance nerve center for that part of the country, for sure.
Yeah, it gives you great cover and a great deal of power. And that area as well, it's not coastal, it's inland Florida. And you essentially, I don't know what Orlando was before Disney World, but
it wasn't. I don't think it was much. I think it was like a swamp.
Swampland,
yeah. Well, he would never live to see Disney World completed. Walt had a little problem with cigarettes, so I'm going to read a few paragraphs. He had surgery, and they did an X-ray, and they found a lump the size of a walnut, and he had lung cancer. He'd smoked for years, since the Red Cross in France, chain smoking, nervously smoking, stained fingers, voice raw and hoarse. Maybe that's how he got the Mickey voice. Diane, his daughter, would recall, I just can't picture him without a cigarette. His hacking cough was dreaded not only among his employees, who had long regarded it as a kind of klaxon of his impending arrival, which, boy, you talk about turning into the villain, right? But among his own family. Sharon had once asked him not to attend a school play she was acting in because she said if she heard him cough, she would forget her lines. Lillian said that Walt had burned more furniture and more rugs and more everything with his cigarettes than anybody I ever knew. Diane claimed that one could always identify Walt's butts in an ashtray because he would smoke the cigarettes down to the last quarter inch until he could barely hold them. He would forget to put them out, she said. He would light them and get carried away with what he was thinking about and just hold them. Sometimes he would hold them in his mouth or in his hand and get an ash on it 2 inches long, which you see in some of the animation. He was often encouraged to quit. At one point, he switched to a pipe, which he had smoked as a young man. Then when the pipe burned a hole in his pocket, he summarily decided that pipe smokers were too slow and laid back, and he abandoned the pipe. In 1957, Gunther Lessing celebrated his first anniversary of not having had a cigarette. Lessing made a point of telling Walt, but Walt wasn't interested. When doctors came to the studio to lecture the staff on the hazards of smoking, Walt wouldn't attend. One Christmas, Diane bought him 2 cartons of filtered cigarettes, thinking they would at least be better for him than the filterless ones he smoked, and Walt promised her he would use them. He just broke off the filters. I didn't tell her how I would use them, he joked to a Confederate. During one of the last meetings with him, Ward Kimball remembered Walt breaking into a long coughing jab. When I timidly asked why he didn't give up smoking, Kimball said, Walt looked up at me, his face still red from the coughing, and rasped, well, I got to have a few vices, don't I? By this time, he was importing French cigarettes. So he smoked for half a century, and it finally caught up to him.
It's the drug of choice for a lot of workaholics.
Yeah, wasn't Serling, Rod Serling?
Yeah, it's very similar sort of story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just 4-pack a day type. Yeah.
Twilight Zone was like sponsored by like Winston cigarettes and stuff.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
I think that's interesting. You have to imagine him too, chain smoking and planning Epcot Center, right? And planning Disney World, and this really, really larger than anything hitherto conceived.
I find that line where he's like, it's very interesting because it's like a weird smirking line from him. It's like, well, I have to have a few vices, don't I? It's like you have to wonder what the other ones were.
Yeah, that means at least 3. So what else you got?
Hold up.
Yeah. He wasn't a boozer, and he didn't like women.
I have such bizarre memories of Disney World. My father, who passed away when I was rather young, was kind of obsessed with it in an odd way. We went more than once from North Dakota, which is a really big deal. It's flights in and out of North Dakota are not cheap. It's more like flying in and out of Alaska than it is almost anywhere else in the country. And I very, very distinctly remember this dang ball at Epcot Center and how just obsessed and strange. This is my trigger. Like, for real, I'm not even joking. Like, I look at it and I just go, yeah, it's so weird. I'm looking at it. I haven't looked at it in ages, but so much of the most vivid memories of my youth are from this. And just the lighting and the trees. I wonder what it would feel like if I went back. I would probably have to take some sedatives or something.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Have you heard of that movie? I think I linked it to you guys. That movie, Escape from Tomorrow.
No.
It's from 2013, and it's about a family on a trip to Disneyland, and it's in black and white, and they had to like surreptitiously film it because obviously you're not allowed to like make a movie, especially a movie of this nature, at Disneyland. And like, so he does this expensive family trip to Disneyland, and 2 things happen. One, he learns that he loses his job, so he loses his source of income to do this expensive family stuff. And then, like, somehow he ingests some, like, hallucinogenic drug. And so then the rest of the movie is, like, this black and white, like, German expressionist freak show of him wandering around Disneyland on this drug and stressed out about this family finances. And so, yeah, I think, Kevin, that's what'll happen if you go to Disney World.
Yeah, that's going to be your experience.
Just such a bizarre set of memories that I have around this. It's very, very, very strange. Epcot stands for, oh, where did it go? I had it right here. I will find it. I think it's
weird that it's interesting that your dad chose, because like I imagine if you're in North Dakota, wouldn't Disneyland be closer, or would it be about
it's kind of the same difference, and frankly, flights down there probably at the time were less expensive.
Well, that's interesting.
Flights to California.
No, flights to World, not Land.
Okay,
to Florida. Because they would practice. It's like Vegas. They would if you were a hayseed, they would practically pay for your flight to come down there. It's still super cheap to go down to Florida. California is not quite as inexpensive. But I don't know why. I don't know if he had ever been to Disneyland. He may have been, but for whatever reason, this was just the pinnacle of life. Was us getting down to Disney World. It was like this. It was like my family's sort of messed up secular Mecca.
It's that way for a lot of people.
Yeah, that way for Khrushchev. Khrushchev was a Muslim denied his visit to Mecca.
Right.
But yeah, and it's like I remember those ads, and like I feel like it was like the mid or late 90s of like the family waking up super early, and like there's like I just remember this image of like a kid going, it's like, we're going to Disneyland or something like that. And it was like this encapsulation of that feeling of waking up before the sun rises and getting on the plane and going to Disneyland. And yeah, it's like this bizarre programming of like, you must come home kind of feeling.
Well, there's that. We went to, when I was a kid, we drove down to Florida. I'm from Michigan. We drove down there. It's 2-day drive. We drove overnight, sleeping in the back of the conversion van, as my parents switched drivers. And I have very distinct memories of it. And I was like 5, I was quite young. But what's one thing is interesting about that is, remember, like anytime like when they win the Super Bowl, do they still do this? When they win the Super Bowl, whoever's like the MVP or whatever, what are you going to do to celebrate? Oh, we're going to Disneyland. They like memed this idea that was the dream you got to live into as a celebration of this thing, right? Yeah. It's fascinating.
It is. It's
one other thing, quick thing on the Disneyland, Disney World stuff. There's a chart I saw recently. I should have saved it for this. That shows like one line is like housing prices relative to income, and one's like inflation, and they're kind of paired with each other. And then the next one is Disney tickets, and they just go through the roof. Like they have like exponentially grown in cost, apparently.
Yeah.
We were kids, they were like $50 or $30, and now they're like $250. It's nuts.
Yeah, and they trap you there for the day too. That's their whole scheme. You're gonna end up getting banged over the head for $30 burgers if you want a decent meal, and they get you through the door.
Yeah.
Well, we are coming to the end here, and I want to read here. So Lillian and Diane got a call from Tommy Wilk that Walt had taken a turn for the worse. Oh, I have to go back because I had it. Epcot stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow.
The Florida project.
Right.
Experimental.
It was a World's Fair inspired park, right? But what a bizarre experimental prototype community of tomorrow. All right, great. In any case, they went over to see their father at the hospital. Diane saw her husband enter Walt's room, then suddenly back out, and he saw the body. And Walt's hands were folded on his chest, quoting, "Uncle Roy was standing at the foot of his bed, massaging one of Dad's feet." So Roy was there at the end, massaging his brother's feet.
Wow.
Diane later recalled just kind of caressing it, and he was talking to him. It sounded something like, "Well, kid, this is the end, I guess." Sharon and Bob Brown arrived shortly afterward, and Brown asked Diane if she would accompany Sharon into the room. Diane took Sharon's hand and placed it on Walt's. "Now, Daddy, now you won't hurt anymore," Sharon whispered. Walt had died at 9:35 a.m. on December 15th of cardiac arrest due to a carcinoma, lung cancer. And this is quite intense. "I took care of Walt in his final days," a nurse wrote the family, "and just want you to know that the poor man was so fearful."
Ooh, I just want you to know
that the poor man was so fearful.
Wow.
So that's the end of Walt Disney's life. Now I have something funny to leaven that slightly. What do you think Walt Disney's last words were, Brad? What do you think?
Oh, I think I know this. It was Kurt Russell.
How do you know that? Yeah, how do you know
I just
that?
remember that as a piece of trivia. Yeah.
Did you know
Kurt
that,
Russell-
Blauer? Is that common knowledge?
I was gonna think something, "That damn owl."
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, right. Well, it's no, and so yeah, Russell was still a teen in 1966 when Disney died.
He was wrapped up in the Disney system, though, wasn't he? Had been in some Disney movies or something.
Yeah.
Russell
Russell
in like the computer wore tennis shoes and all that sort of.
Okay.
There was
Yeah.
that weird phase in like late 60s, early 70s of like weird gimmick comedies like The Shaggy DA and
Yeah, right.
like
Right.
Magnificent Merlin Man and his Magnificent Mobile, kind of like
Right,
those
right.
weird kind of movies.
Right.
Yeah, apparently Kurt Russell was the last thing that Disney wrote. And Kurt said, "We did have a personal relationship. We played ping pong at lunch sometimes. He'd come down to set. We'd go watch movies at that studio he was making, and he'd come down and ask if I wanted to see them. He'd take me around and introduce me to all the different departments at Disney, and at one point gave me a bunch of original photo cells that they make the backdrop drawings of the characters and stuff like that." So apparently he thought of him as a bit of a grandfather. Kurt Russell.
He could have been the next Bobby Driscoll, though.
Yeah. Well, I have one more reading from the book. Then we'll ask the classic closer question. And then we will do another 30 minutes on the Patreon episode with Blauer about some especially dark business with the CIA. I don't feel like I got too much into the whole Monarch programming, MK Ultra, deep rabbit hole, Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz business, but yeah.
The lawyer just gave me a thumbs up.
Oh, okay. The lawyer who has you held hostage there in Michigan, just off camera.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Tell him he's not allowed to talk about the Monarch programming. It's like the mouse is there with a gun. Get on with it. All right. I'm going to stick to my day job. So here you go. He was frozen. At least that was the rumor that emerged shortly after his death and quickly became legend. Walt Disney had been cryogenically preserved, hibernating like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, to await the day when science could revive him and cure his disease. Though it is impossible to determine exactly, the source of the rumor may have been a tabloid named National Spotlight, whose correspondent claimed to have sneaked into St. Joseph's Hospital, where Disney had expired, disguised himself as an orderly, picked the lock on a storage room door, and spotted Disney suspended in a metal cylinder. The story also surfaced in 1969 in a French publication, Ici Paris, which said it based its report on individuals close to Disney, and it was repeated in the National Tattler, an American scandal rag, which added that Disney had instructed doctors to thaw him in 1975. Yet another supermarket tabloid, Midnight, under the headline, "Walt Disney is being kept alive in deep freeze," quoted both a studio librarian who remembered Disney accumulating a vast file of film material on cryogenics and an acquaintance of Disney's who said that the producer was obsessed with these movies. A writer for the Mickey Mouse Club television show produced under Disney auspices seemed to corroborate the librarian's recollection by recalling that Disney had once asked him about cryogenics and that the writer had then had the studio library staff research the subject. Ward Kimball, a puckish animator at the studio, took some pride in keeping the rumor afloat, and Disney himself may have lent it credence. According to one account, just weeks after his death, studio department heads were invited to a screening room with nameplates on the seats, then watched a film of Disney sitting at his desk and eerily pointing to and addressing each of them on future plans. He concluded by smiling knowingly and saying that he would be seeing them soon. In truth, Disney's final destination was fire, not ice. He had been cremated and his ashes interred in a mausoleum in a remote corner of the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Glendale, California, not far from his studio. So he made a movie to bring himself back from the dead, to tell his staff what's coming next.
Wow.
And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that he would be the kind of megalomaniac to do like a kind of, if you're watching this, I'm dead now.
Yeah, that's right.
Movie,
Yeah, right.
like to his board. And like the whole thing about him being cryogenically frozen is sort of metaphysically true in a sense, because what was that quote earlier about like everything at Disneyland just screamed Walt or whatever?
Is Walt.
It's like, is Walt. And so it's like, he really he did successfully alchemize or transubstantiate himself into this corporate entity that sort of continues on his project. And so in that sense, he really is eternal and immortal. The true last magical act of the Sorcerer King.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And and that's why the ice cryogenically frozen thing sticks so much, because it encapsulates kind of what you're saying, because in our head he is still alive and he could come back at any time and he never really goes away. I like that.
That's very insightful. I was going to say that is the life and times of Walt Disney. That's the end of this episode. What would Walt be doing today? Brad first, then Blauer.
Okay, yeah. I mean, he would they'd thaw him after he's been thawed out. He looks around and gobbles up the last 2 or 3 IPs that are not already owned by Disney. Whatever that's happened to be. I'm not even sure what doesn't count as Disney anymore. But yeah, I think that's what
he keeps orchestrating the next thing. Yeah. What do
Yeah.
you think if Walt Disney is transplanted into 2021, Blauer? What do you think he's up to?
I'm wondering if he would ever run for president. Maybe not if he's really a Spaniard. Run for president, but then again, I think, he might look at presidency as below his station. So I think I'll answer this way. I think if he's cryogenically frozen and then he's unthawed or dethawed, the first words he would say in 2021 are, "I need a cigarette."
Yeah.
Tremendous.
For sure.
Very good. Yes. No filters. The French sort. Blauer, thanks so much for coming on this episode. We're going to do some more again.
Yeah, I appreciate your time, man, and thanks what you brought
Absolutely.
to it, man. That was fantastic.
Yeah, you really added a lot of flavor and some insights, and it's a pleasure to get to hang out this way too. You're a lot of fun on the Bird website. Where can people find you? Where can people find Apocalypse Confidential? Let us know here now.
Oh yeah, you can find me on the Bird website at Blauer Geist. It's Blauer BLAUER_Geist GEIST, and Apocalypse Confidential is Apocalypse I'm not going to spell all that out. Apocalypse-confidential.com.
We've got an upper middle brow audience. We'll be able to figure out how to spell that.
If you can't spell apocalypse, you're not going to get it anyway. Blauer, I got to ask you, and tell me, what's the origin of the name? It means blue ghost, right? Blauer Geist. What?
It's I had an old account that got suspended for undisclosed reasons. That was
violating Disney IP, probably.
Right,
exactly.
Right. Shenanigans.
For spamming their replies with MK Ultra information. Called the Blue Rider, because I was inspired at the time. I was like writing some story that was like inspired by like, there was this like weird art magazine in like Berlin in like the 1910s called the Blue Rider, or whatever that is in German, blue or Reiter or whatever.
Blau.
And so Blaureiter. And so I was inspired by that. And so I was just like, all right, I'll just use that as the name. And then when I got banned and I came back, I was like, well, what do I come back as? Obviously, I have to come back as a ghost. And basically, I ran it through different Google translations. Like I think I did try to do like it in Gaelic, and it was like something that was like indecipherable. But then I came upon Blauer Geist, and I was like,
it's pretty good.
That works.
I'm glad I know the origin story of that name. I always smile when I see Blauer on the Bird website. So go give him a follow. When he wakes up from a nap, you'll know it. And but it's not time for a nap now. It's time to do another 30 minutes on the After Dark. I'm Kevin Kautzman. You can find that at patreon.com/Art of Dark Pod. We're at artofdarkpod.com, and on the Bird website. Brad manages that very well. We're getting lots of feedback from people. People like to tell us who we should do. We're getting excited for a lot of cool stuff coming up. We got Frank Herbert, Bill Hicks. We've got a great guest who's going to have his own Amazon comedy special coming up. So we're going to tease that a little bit. He's going to join us to talk about the great Bill Hicks. Who else are we doing here for the rest of the year, Brad?
James Joyce.
With Forest of Symbols.
With Forest of Symbols will be coming on to do that. And then MF Doom just after the first of the year. So
tremendous.
Yeah.
All right, boys. Well, listen. I want you to join me now in about 5 minutes on After Dark. Hey there, hi there. Try not to get too triggered. Your handler is waiting.